Members, good afternoon. We've received apologies from Michael Copeland, Stephen Moutry and Alex Atwood. I think Alex Maskey and David Michael Veen will be joining us as the meeting progresses. In terms of chairperson's business, members, as you know, I was away last week with the clerk in Washington for the St. Patrick's Day celebrations. I suppose the chief one in terms of the committee was the Northern Ireland Bureau's breakfast on St. Patrick's morning in the Willard Hotel in DC. And I think it's worth, certainly my opinion would be, the head of the civil service was asked to stand in for OFMDFM, who were back here working on welfare. My opinion was that Malcolm McKibben did an exceptionally good job, a very well critically acclaimed address at relatively short notice. And if members want to know how he got 50 Shades of Grey into the speech, I'm afraid you're going to have to ask him yourself. At page 5, members, in your packs, correspondence and information from Include Youth. They're having a conference called Behind the Headlines at Queen's University towards the end of April. The focus is the media representation of children and young people in Northern Ireland. And you may recall at our planning day last September, we talked about whether we should look at this, possibly in conjunction with the CAL committee. I've had an invite as committee chair to participate in a panel discussion that afternoon. Are you content that I participate? Because I would be keen to if the members are content. Okay, thank you. Then switching to table packs at page 3, response has been received from the First and Deputy First Ministers to the invitation to attend committee today to discuss the programme for government and the budget. Clearly they have declined. Pause for comment. If not, a copy of the committee's current invitations is back in the main packet, page number 8. We move to item 3, draft minutes of our meeting of the 18th of March. Which begin at page 10 of the meeting packs. Are members content to agree the draft minutes?
Agreed.
Thank you. Matters arising then at page 17 is the list of outstanding correspondence. In the absence of comment on that, I refer you to the correspondence summary sheet this week at page 20 with all correspondence received since the last meeting, and I'll ask as usual the clerk to highlight any issues that she believes require decisions. Members are, of course, at liberty to raise any matter of correspondence that they wish to.
Thanks, Chair. The first item of correspondence I would draw your attention to is from the Committee for Education relating to the Special Educational Needs and Disability Bill. And they've pointed out that the bill includes provision relating to the rights of children in respect of access to SEND provision, and clauses 9, 10 and 11 transfer rights from parents to their children. And they've suggested that this might be of interest to OFMDFM as the sponsoring body of the Commissioner for Children and Young People. In addition, clause 7 provides parents with rights to a special educational needs statement for children under the age of 2. And again, this might be of interest to OFMDFM given the responsibility in respect of the childcare strategy. So it's just to ask if members are content to forward this to OFMDFM to seek comment on the SEND bill. The next item is at page 69, and it's correspondence from the Stronger Together network on concerns about the delay in confirming the Minority Ethnic Development Fund application. In papers for last week's meeting, there was correspondence from OFMDFM which indicated a business case for the fund has been developed and is under consideration within the department, and it also advised that once the necessary governance processes have been met, it's expected the public call for applications for the fund will be announced. During the briefing then, I think at last week's meeting, officials also advised there would be an extension to existing contractual commitments under MEDF until decisions have been made on the 15-16 application. So are members content to write to the department to seek further clarification on the extension to the current commitments and also a timetable for the applications in respect to the 15-16 fund? And are members content to write back to Stronger Together to outline the current position and what the committee is doing? Get further information. And finally, at page 6 of table packs, members will recall following the committee's visit to Interaction Belfast, the chairperson had written on the back of correspondence received about funding. They've had their funding application turned down for core funding. So the committee wrote to the First and Deputy First Ministers. The response is at page 6 of the table pack, which indicates that Interaction Belfast have actually appealed that decision, but it also suggests that Interaction Belfast may wish to consider applying through the Central Good Relations Fund for 15-16. And it remembers content to forward that correspondence to Interaction Belfast. That's everything, Chair.
Okay, thank you very much. Any comments from members, or will we press on? Item 6 then. Members, we've completed the oral evidence in our inquiry into Together Building a United Community. So just to recap, 70 written submissions came in response to our call for evidence back in the autumn. Since then, we've received 10 oral briefings. We've hosted 2 stakeholder events, one with young people from the Bites project and one with groups and organisations who'd provided us with written evidence. We've also held 2 external meetings, the first focused on issues at urban interfaces and the second on issues of contested space in rural areas. Evidence gathered to date has been summarised by staff in the issues table, which you'll find in your papers at page 75. Members, as is normal practice, we'll have a final evidence session with departmental officials, which will provide them with an opportunity to respond to us, to the issues that we are raising and have raised to us during the course of the inquiry. And at this point, I'm going to ask Karen to talk us through the issues paper, which, as I say, is page 75 in your packs.
Chair, I'll not take too long, as I know we need to press on with business, but basically, page 75 is a sort of a table which highlights the evidence that the committee has received, so from the written evidence, the stakeholder event and the oral evidence. So in a sense, it's not an analysis as such, it's this is what we've heard and this is what we're presenting to, the committee's presenting to the department. And so the table just aligns everything against the terms of reference that the committee agreed back in July and highlights different issues that have been raised. So, for example, an issue has been lack of consultation in relation to the formation of TBAC, a sense of lack of recognition of the work that's been going on the ground, issues around certainty about funding, issues around dissemination of academic research, with particular focus on the District Council Good Relations Programme, and a number of items came up there. We've had different views about single identity work, and those are both included, whether that's still a way forward or whether that's still worthwhile or whether that's something that needs to be moved on from. Some concerns about the TBAC strategy. So overall, there's been generally positive welcome for TBAC in terms of an aspiration that people can get behind. But then just how the headline actions kind of work in with that, and how it kind of is working out in practice. The issues that we've heard in relation to urban interfaces and contested space at rural areas are also reflected in there, and then some of the things around community planning, which is obviously a DOE issue. So the officials from OFMDFM may not respond to those issues, but at least they'll know that these are the things that have been coming through, and also just about the good relations indicators. I can, if members have particular questions on this, I can respond, but yeah.
No, I think well, excuse me, members, any comments or queries?
It seemed to be a good outline of issues that were raised.
So, Karen, thank you very much indeed. That's I find that very helpful. If members are content, could I suggest, as we will be looking for this final session with officials, that we forward this now in advance so that they know where we may be coming from in terms of that last session?
You know, the one thing that concerns me a bit, Chair, at the minute is, I mean, there's a lot of more negative stuff that's come out, and you expect that in an inquiry in terms of finance, in terms of all. There are positive aspects, and some of the positive aspects were mentioned, particularly by some of the academics. Just a wee bit concerned that the whole thing doesn't come out totally negative, and that there's not a good base to build on in some of the good practice that has been going on as well. And I think for one reason or another, maybe some of the good practice hasn't come through in the people that have spoken to us so far. I don't know how we get around that, but I think it's worthwhile thinking about that and seeing if we can put a more balanced view on the whole thing in terms of, it's probably one of the things you mentioned, Karen. Forgive me if I've...
Just that, so the start of this paper that we would send, the committee would send down to the department, it just recognises that those responding to the inquiry recognise the achievement in producing a devolved strategy to deal with these issues, and there's been an overall welcome for the aspiration behind Together Building United Community. And so in the issues paper, things like the academic research, so it says there seems to be a positive working relationship between academics and the department, and good helpful research is regularly produced. And then just that comment that you've made that just doesn't seem to be widely known about. So but if you, I mean, we could hold off on this for a couple of days if there's something you want to add.
I think it's trying to, at the end of this, get some positivity around it that can be built on. In terms of, we've heard from two councils in terms of, other councils over the years have put a lot of work in as well, but they didn't turn up.
Yeah,
that's not our fault that didn't happen. I'm not criticising, I mean, we got the people, we advertised and we got the people who came back. So I'm just concerned that we have a really balanced view of the thing, so that we can say to the department, look, there's a lot of good work has been ongoing, which there has been. How can we build on that?
Yeah, and I think we can do that in the final report, Jimmy. I think it probably because this is an issues paper, it is negative, because issues tend to be, here's what we think, whoever we are, should have been done better, wasn't done, or whatever. So yeah, the point's made. This I think by definition is quite negative as an issues paper.
Yeah. But I'm not criticising for that, Chair.
No. Yeah, but there's another side to the story. Yeah. No, I appreciate that thought. So we are content to send it to officials in advance. Yep. Members, on the 11th of March, we took evidence from representatives of the Rural Community Network. The issues they were concerned with were the sort of issues facing rural communities as part of this inquiry. During the meeting, we actually lost our decision-making quorum. And while the meeting had to close formally, we continued informally. I was there, Mr. Atwood and Mr. Michael Veen were still there. We have a summary of that part of the discussion available at page 82 in your main packs. I'm just wondering whether members are content that we include that summary on page 82 with our inquiry papers. Okay, appreciate it, thank you. Following our briefings from NILGA in early February with regard to our inquiry, we wrote to the department asking about the implementation of the recommendations contained in the NISRA evaluation of the District Council Good Relations Programme. You can see we have had a response from the department. It's at page 87 of your packs. The question, members, is are you content that we forward that response to NILGA for their information and then include the response in our inquiry papers? Okay, thank you. And co-design is a key feature of implementation of the various headline actions in TBUC. So if you skip forward one page to page number 88, you'll find an update on the summer camp co-design workshops, which were held in December and January. The department is advising that £1 million has been secured to implement the summer camp pilot programme for this calendar year 2015. Are you content, two questions, member, content to include the correspondence in the inquiry papers? And secondly, do you wish to request a budget profile for TBUC initiatives over the lifetime of the strategy? Yep, thank you.
Chair, is it possible to get a bit more briefing on what the summer camps will actually look like as well?
Chris, I would, if you are content, I would be happy to write to the department at this stage.
Sure, yeah.
Just when we get to the forward work programme, which we will do soon.
Written brief, yeah. Sure.
Members content? Okay, thank you. Now, members, we turn to consideration of a plan for taking oral evidence with regard to our scrutiny of the Children's Services Cooperation Bill. Lots of papers on this. Clerk's cover note at page 99. And at 103, the organisations and individuals that have provided written submissions following our call for evidence. Then page 105, views from the written submissions have been broken down clause by clause, very helpfully, thank you very much. And in table papers, there's an update at page 20. And on this occasion, I'll ask Cathy to speak to the issues.
Okay, thanks, Chair. I'm not really going to go into detail on the issues just at this point in time, but what we do need to do is for members to agree how we proceed with oral evidence gathering on the bill. The committee has to agree its report. The committee stage has been extended to the 3rd of July. The call for evidence, following publication of the call for evidence, the committee also wrote directly to over 140 stakeholders, to all executive departments, to the organisations listed specifically at clause 4 of the bill, and to NILGA on behalf of all district councils. And in response, 30 written submissions were received. So far, the committee has had 2 evidence sessions with Stephen Agnew, one with OFMDFM officials and one with the Health and Social Care Board and the Children and Young People Strategic Partnership. So it's to look at, as I say, at how to take forward the remaining oral evidence that's required. Basically, within the plan for the bill, there are 3 oral evidence sessions left. There is a session already scheduled with the Children and Young People's Commissioner on the 15th of April, and beyond that there would be 3, although a 4th could be scheduled if committees agree, if the committee agreed. At paragraph 6 on page 100, there's a table which has themed the organisations which have indicated that they would be willing to come and give evidence to the committee. So there are children's groups in the voluntary sector are grouped together. There were a number of responses actually from groups that would represent children with disabilities or special needs, healthcare professionals, NILGA obviously on behalf of the councils, and there was one individual who actually made quite a substantive response to the committee. So it was just to check what members would like to do, what kind of evidence they would like to take next based on this. If the committee were to agree to have 4 sessions, the College of Occupational Therapists could most likely come along with the disability groups, because they're working in terms of children with special needs as well, or additional needs. And if you wanted representatives from the children's groups and voluntary sector, I would suggest picking 4 out of the groups that are there, because really the committee can only hear from 4 groups at a time.
So first of all, are members content that we take the College of Occupational Therapists along with the named disability groups? Yeah? Okay, thank you. The individual, I think, is worth hearing from, because she has submitted a very substantive and certainly superficially knowledgeable response, gone to a lot of effort, seems to know her way around this area and is offering expertise. So it wouldn't necessarily be excuse me, a particularly long session, but might be a very valuable one. So that would leave that first group, the children's groups, stroke voluntary sector. And I'm wondering if there are any strong views, or whether you're content to leave it to the committee staff to turn 7 into 4.
Chair, my experience is that most of those organisations, if not all of them, work extremely closely together. If not all, are on the Child Poverty Alliance. Certainly, the vast majority of them are. So they may be able to reach an agreement whereby they decide amongst themselves how they respond to that. They'll be getting 1 oral evidence session. Yeah. And
Children in Northern Ireland, it's worth pointing out, they made a substantive response, and it was actually endorsed by a number of other organisations as well. So
they're an umbrella organisation. It might, don't want to be over directive, Chair, but it might be worth as a first protocol going through Children in Northern Ireland to say that we've grouped them in these thematic ways, and is it possible to coordinate a session where those organisations get represented, it might be possible to do that.
Ask them to reach an understanding.
I think the vast majority of them are
Yeah.
members of the Child Poverty Alliance, for example. Yeah.
Are we content to put it to the groups themselves to turn 7 into 4? Yeah? Okay, very much. So you've got yes to that. Okay, then. Go down, yes. And Nilga, are we content that we want to hear from Nilga on behalf of the councils? Yeah. Okay, thank you very much. And are we content to commission Assembly Research to take a look at integrated working with regard to children's services in other jurisdictions, so we have something to benchmark? Yep. Thank you very much. One small issue, or maybe not small, one issue I should say, is that the Department of Health has not provided a response to our request for a written submission. Members, and given the proposed role for the Health and Social Care Board, and indeed under restructuring, if we go from 12 departments to 9, Health could have an enhanced role with regard to children's services. So can I propose we write again?
Great.
Yep.
And I think Health has issues on it, and I'm put it on the record now. We're not convinced about Health Services Board.
From your point of view? Yeah.
Something that the bureaucracy around the whole thing, and maybe has property terms of where the bill hasn't backs on it, costs, everything else.
Yeah, I think I have said previously, the clerk and I met the chair and the clerk of the Health Committee, because I don't want us going a long way down a road only to discover that the Health Committee isn't happy. So I think there are certainly issues.
There's a lot of issues, an awful lot of issues, even with the drafting of the bill, but that's
Yeah.
would be more positive than that in future weeks.
Okay. But you're happy, Jim, that we write to the department again, ask for a response?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think Health, Health do have issues, so you need to tease those out.
Yeah.
Whether it's through the committee or whatever.
Yeah, there's no point ignoring a potential problem at this stage. Okay, thank you. And are we content to send the clause-by-clause table to the bill sponsor and the department so they can give us comment in advance of the evidence sessions for the 29th of April, with, of course, the caveat it may be subject to change following oral evidence sessions? Okay, thank you very much. That completes that. If we could go, members, to the draft forward work programme, because if we have to make a decision, I'm keen we have a quorum for that. Can I ask you if you're content that we take that now? It's at page 150 of your meeting packs. Junior ministers have indicated they'll come to speak to us on the 15th of April, and that's specifically with regard to age discrimination legislation. And on that basis, it might be necessary to reschedule the inquiry session with OFMDFM officials that have been scheduled, as you can see, on that day. Can I ask, are we content with the proposed forward work programme, or are there any amendments or suggestions or comments?
Just to ask Chair if and when the First and Deputy First Minister are going to make any presentations to the committee during this Assembly session.
Yep, that's a very good question, Chris. I am guessing not before the 13th of May session. And you'll notice 6th of May we've got a TBC of departmental briefings. I'm wondering, given the date and what follows the next day, are we going to meet?
I think it's going to be your chair, quite frankly.
I think this was the case last year.
Maybe the last time. 2 or 3 coming to find you have nobody. I mean, I thought that was a sort of
Given.
like a given that people would be involved and
In
whatever's happening.
So that's a formal proposal that we
Probably wise. Yeah.
postpone our 6th of May meeting from. Do we need to do that formally, or is that no?
Yeah,
that's
yeah, no, we can put it in the minutes.
I'm happy
If
to.
we're agreed.
But we're all
Here tonight.
agreed. Yeah. That's okay. And apart from that, then we're content with the forward work programme as on page 150. Okay, thank you very much. Okay, we now go to our first briefing. We have 2 on the programme for government members. Normally we would do this over 2 weeks, but we have Easter and recess coming up, so we're going to take a break today. And then we'll have budget as well. So in this first session, members, it's PFG commitments 31 and 32, which is the Social Investment Fund. Commitment 33, childcare. 34 and 37, delivering social change. 38 is age discrimination legislation. And the final one in this session is commitment 67, which is TBUC, Together Building a United Community. So Clerk's brief is at page 140. Your blue folders have been updated with the papers from the briefing in December. Papers in respect of this briefing today, I have to say, were received in the committee office at 10:19 hours today. So they are in tabled packs at page 29. So we're joined by Ronja Killen, by Henry Johnson, and by Dennis McMahon. Dennis,
Chair.
why 10:19? How can we scrutinise papers?
All I can say, Chair, is just once again I apologise, and it's not acceptable. That's all I can say.
You've said that before,
I
Dennis.
know, and I'm afraid that's all I can say.
Why was it delayed this time?
Well, it was under the papers were under consideration in the department, and I took that time to get them to the point where they were in a position to be released to the committee.
Under consideration by whom?
Well, I mean, as I said before, Chair, I mean, I can't distinguish between officials and ministers. We're all working as a team in the department, and it was under consideration generally. But all papers obviously have to come through ministers before they appear. But
Officials, special advisors, and ministers.
yes,
But you would those 3 categories of
Yes.
person. Okay. Well, would you like to talk us through them? And you'll have to assume that some members at least have not read them, because I certainly haven't.
Chair, can I just add to that? I've had Committee for Regional Development all day prior to OFMDFM committee, so I haven't had a chance to look at them either. It'd be different if this wasn't a regular pattern, but it is. It's hard to conclude it's nothing other than contempt for the committee and the public that we're meant to serve and scrutinising the progress on it.
I get you, Chris. I don't think we can throw anything more towards Dennis McMahon, because he has apologised and explained. I think he said all he can say. Sorry, Dennis, before has anybody actually had the opportunity to study them? Any member present? So you have 5 members. It looks like nobody's had an opportunity, Dennis. So if you could talk us through them.
So I think I didn't speak, Chair. So
Well,
we're making assumptions of what I was thinking.
well, Jimmy, have you had the opportunity to read the papers?
I'm quite happy to hear what the officials have to say, and I'm sure I'll find a couple of.
I'm none the wiser, Jimmy,
Questions
as to
then.
whether you read them or not.
But don't make assumptions about other people, as you know the facts.
Sometimes, if people don't answer a question, you can make.
Not for the Chair to make assumptions, what's in people's minds.
Anyway, Dennis, if you would talk us through them,
All of
on the basis that 4 at least of the people here have not had the chance to read them.
Yeah, just by way of background, it's probably, although this is about the commitments against my directorate, it's probably just worth saying that overall, in terms of the programme for government, there's been continuing good progress across departments. Just for information, that approximately 80% of the commitments track overall. and this is compared to 70% at the last stage in the last programme, at the same stage in the last programme for government. Roughly a quarter of commitments have been completed at this stage. Just a bit of general background. So I suppose starting then with 31 and 32, the main point I suppose is around the amount of resources that have been allocated. At this stage, 50.2 million of the £80 million social investment fund has been committed to 33 projects, and that's approximately 63% of budget. That's £23 million worth of capital and £27 million worth of revenue. In the first tranche of projects, there are 6 projects at tender stage in terms of revenue projects, 2 projects completing drafts of their specifications, and various projects at other stages. In terms of capital projects, we have 1 project on site, Bryson Street Surgery. We have 5 projects tendering for design teams. And then in terms of the tranche 2, which is the next set of projects, 9 projects announced on the 20th of January. We have 2 letters of offer issued under revenue and 6 letters of offer issued on capital. So I suppose the overall thing to say is that the programme is moving on, and letters of offer have been issued, and we're going to the next stages now in terms of getting the projects up and running. Obviously, that still means there are still approvals needed, and there are still more projects that need to be approved in order to get the full £80 million committed. So that's where we are at the moment. I'm happy to take any questions that you have on that.
Thanks, Dennis. Can I just take it back to your first comment? Overall programme for government, just give me those figures again, please.
So overall, £50.2 million has been committed to 33 projects. That's approximately 63% of the available budget.
And in terms of, you then had a comparator to this time?
Sorry, you're talking about the original programme for government. 80% of commitments overall in the programme for government are on track, right, as opposed to 70% at the same time in the last programme for government.
Right, and what do you mean by at the same time?
Well, at the same point in the programme for government, so at quarter, which quarter is this?
Quarter 3.
Quarter 3 of the final year.
This is a few weeks from the end of the programme for government?
This was based on responses we commissioned from departments just before Christmas, and was meant to be based on the 31st of December position. We've just commissioned a further and final update from departments for Q4, which is the end of...
Which is the end of the programme for government?
Which is the end of the current programme.
Was there to have been an interim review of the PFG?
Yes, there was. And
did it happen?
Well, the commitments were reviewed, and indeed one of the ministers are looking at this as part of considering whether to extend the programme for government and to extend some of the commitments for an additional year.
So when did the interim review kick off?
Of the exact date, Henry, did you want to?
Yeah, the exact date. It was beginning, I think it was March last year. We commissioned the first pieces of input from departments. We refreshed those over the summer period, and more recently, I think January time.
We were updated again in January.
We asked departments again to update their view of what their deliverables would be against the initial 82, and we also sought ideas and a limited number of new commitments for a 1-year extension.
So it was interim rather than mid-term?
Yeah, it was past the mid-term point.
Okay. What can you tell us about what happens about the rest of the mandate in terms of the programme for government?
Well, the intention is there's a draft extension to the programme, and that would allow us to extend the commitments to the end of this Assembly term.
Do they need to be adjusted because of budgetary constraints?
Well, that's one of the issues. That is absolutely, that's one of the issues that's been taken into account, and one of the things that departments have been asked to do is to look very carefully at all of their commitments to see to what extent they can extend them in the current budget situation.
And to what degree that they can deliver further in the final year. A number of the commitments had achieved or nearly achieved the the commitment to date, and it's whether they could actually go further within their budget position to deliver additional of whatever it was in the final year of the programme. So departments obviously needed to take a view on what their budget was likely to be before they could finalise those. So the intention would be, after it's been agreed within the department, we would assume that it will go around the executive for a final assurance that people are still content with what their departments are signed up for.
So given we're looking at a 1-year extension to the programme for government, speed should be of the essence, I would have thought. Is there any deadline for publishing the new programme for government, or the extension to the programme for government?
Obviously, it's something that's under consideration. Ideally, the sooner, the nearer to the start of the next year, which we're coming into now, the better, because it allows people to plan. But obviously, departments have been planning on a provisional basis, on the basis of the existing commitments, and extending them out.
Yeah.
So as soon as possible really would be the answer.
Is there a timeline for this, Dennis? Is there a bit of paper that says departments respond by X date, further consideration by Y?
Departments have already responded. There was a timeline for the input from departments. Some departments were able to meet that deadline. A number of departments didn't meet that deadline, but we now have, I think, all inputs in from all departments, and that's what's now under consideration within the department.
Okay. If we look at the commitments in groups, starting with 3132,
Yes.
Social Investment Fund, milestone target for 1314 was not met. Just remind us again, Dennis, on where we are.
So, as I say, we've right now we've £50 million committed to 33
yeah.
projects,
Right.
and that's 23 million capital and 27 million pounds revenue. We have then to we're seeking to put the additional projects through the approvals process, and those projects that we've already put through the approvals process are either being tendered, or they're actually, either being tendered or they're going through some additional planning work by the lead partners. But they're all moving ahead, and they're all of the £50 million that's subject to letter of offer. So really now it's a case of making sure that these projects are implemented.
When do you think, what's your latest estimate on when you think all the funding will be allocated?
Well, it's hard to give a hard and fast figure, but I mean, I would be very hopeful that over the next 6 months that these will be moved. We've worked very closely with our colleagues, finance colleagues, to try to improve the processes and to get the projects up and running. One of the issues we've had, I have to say, is about the information coming back in some cases from projects, and I think, in fairness, that I've said this before, but that does reflect the fact that this is a very different process from the sort of thing you would see normally. I mean, normally you'd have these projects well worked up, normally to get to a business case stage, whereas in this case, ministers wanted to get the ideas from the community, get them through the approvals process to the point where they could be designed up, and that, there's no point in denying it, that has been a difficult process. But I would be hopeful that over the next 6 months, the majority of that funding could be allocated.
And then spent? You expect it all to be spent by the end of 17-18, which I think was the previous position?
I think the current profiles are the majority of it will be spent, but whether all of it's spent or not depends on a number of factors, because even, as I say, once we've got these through the approvals process and people have started looking at them again, they've sort of, for example, they've found some of the projects are going up in price. Just because people have started to do the design work at a level that they wouldn't have done before the money was out. So I would expect the majority of it to be spent by that stage, but I couldn't give you an absolute cast iron commitment that it would all be spent by that stage. Yeah. What I can say is ministers have given a very clear, have expressed a very clear view that these projects need to continue until they are completed, and that the £80 million will be committed overall.
Okay. Yep, that's clear. Majority is pretty broad, Dennis. Can you be more specific?
I don't have the exact figures in terms of the profiles in front of me, but we can get those for you and give you an exact estimate or a precise estimate as to where we are at the moment.
Okay. Members, to keep a bit of shape to this, I would intend to open up for questions on each group as we go. So, Deputy Chair Chris Little.
Thanks, Chair.
Point.
So then it's the budget for Social Investment Fund for Programme for Government 2011 to 2015 was £80 million in total, and at the end of that period, no money whatsoever has actually been expended on actual projects.
Well, there has been some money expended, but not large amounts. No, you know, and the vast majority of it has not been.
Okay.
Spent. Yeah.
How would you, I think it would be remiss of us not to give that fairly robust scrutiny. And how would you characterise that scale of failure in relation to that project that was dedicated to tackle social deprivation during a time of recession and lack of resources?
Well, I think the term failure.
Sorry, I forget to declare an interest as a member of the area steering group for the Social Investment Fund area steering group for East Belfast. Apologies, Chair.
Well, I mean, just to be clear, I mean, as far as the original commitment's concerned, we did not meet that original commitment. There's absolutely no doubt about that. I'm not going to try and make any excuses around that. But I do think it is worth having a bit of a look at the process and having a bit of a think about what we were trying to achieve. Ministers were very clear that this was not going to be business as usual. They did not want us to fund projects that maybe had been sitting around for years. But some of them, there's no doubt about it, some of the ideas have been around for years. But they didn't want us to come up with ideas at the centre or ideas by officials or by arm's length organisations. They did not want the ideas to come from there. They wanted them to come from the ground up, from the communities themselves. The nature of that was a very different process to the sort of process that normally happens in government. As a result of that, there's no doubt that it led to a number of issues. I mean, if I was doing this again, I suppose one of the issues we'd want to look at would be the fact that the programme was developed without necessarily having the delivery partners identified. Now again, that was about having the communities driving this before delivery partners were selected, because ministers did not want us basically setting the agenda for communities. The idea was communities would do this themselves. But I have to say the other side of that is when you don't have the delivery partners in from the very beginning, while you will get more creativity and you will get different ideas and you'll get things that don't necessarily come up, the other side of that is it does mean that you have, when you get to the detailed planning stage, it makes it very difficult to say exactly how you're going to implement the idea, exactly what it's going to cost, and it makes it very difficult to get it through the approvals process, and that was what we found. Now that was then compounded by the fact that we found it very difficult to get information from people as to, you know, in order to inform the business case. So all of those things definitely did not make a process that ran smoothly or easily, but again, it depends on the criteria. I think it's worth saying that right from the very beginning of this process, we have put this to external scrutiny in the form of gateway reviews. We've had people looking at the process to see how we can improve it. And again, I'm not for 1 minute saying that we didn't learn a lot or that the process wouldn't be very different now to what we tried a number of years ago. There's no doubt about that. But there has been a recognition that actually taking a programme at this scale with as few staff as we have, compared to, you know, we're not talking about the sorts of numbers that would be taking forward the likes of neighbourhood renewal. And taking that forward to the stage we got it to has been actually a huge achievement for the team involved. But again, notwithstanding that, the bottom line is, if you look at the original commitment, have we met the original commitment? We failed on the original commitment. So I'm not trying to hide that, but I'm just saying that's what we've learned from the process.
Appreciate the response. Is it possible to access any of the gateway reviews?
Well, typically they're not. Typically they go to the senior responsible owner, and they're not normally released. But it's something we can certainly take back and have a look at.
And obviously a welcome investment in Bryson Street surgery in East Belfast. But I suppose from a committee point of view, I would ask, did it really take a 4-year process to work out that investing in the health of people in a neighbourhood renewal interface area in Belfast was a good thing to do?
No, it certainly didn't, and there's absolutely none of the objectives of any of the projects that anybody here could argue with. There's no way. You know, when you look at, if you look at any of the list of projects in SIF, you couldn't look at them and say, well, actually, we don't need this, or we don't need to tackle that particular objective. The problem comes down to when you start to look at the numbers, and you have to go through a very rigorous process to say, okay, this is public money, and we have to look at all the options for spending that public money, including the preferred option that people have come forward with. And then we have to do a full cost-benefit analysis of that, and look at all of the potential implications. So going through that process does take time, and it takes time wherever that's done. And given the large number of business cases that we've looked at in this case, it has placed particular pressures on people. Now, what I would say, though, is one of the things we found, and I'm not saying this was the case necessarily with Bryson Street, but we have found with a lot of the projects that people will say, this is a great idea, this is a way of tackling a particular aim, and you know, if it's a physical asset in particular, they'll say, you know, there's a particular level of demand for that. Now then, the problem is when we go to try to assess that level of demand, it's difficult to do it without the actual asset being in place. So what we find is, you know, you'll get letters of interest maybe going to projects, but that's where we will find the challenge comes to us to say, well, are those letters definitive enough? Do they give it the level of support to be sure that when this particular facility is built, it won't be basically a white elephant, that it will actually be up, it'll be fully utilised?
I think the two challenges for us, the first one is the sustainability issue, which is particularly germane to the capital programmes, where we had to be certain that it's a white elephant that sat there with the door closed. That there had to be a realistic revenue stream to keep that in operation. The second issue was back to just the sheer number of business cases we were developing. Sometimes with groups had very little experience in this area, so they weren't, in many cases, the usual suspects. And we were asking them questions, and maybe volunteers and small management committees, and they found it very difficult sometimes to get the answers to those questions. So I think there's an issue there in terms of how we could have maybe supported people better through that process. I think that's one learning point. I think the second learning point, which we did a bit of, was trying to network maybe expertise between stronger areas and weaker areas. And people were really good in terms of identifying issues in the area, very good at identifying problems in the area, and less good at identifying solutions. So maybe we needed to provide a wee bit more support for people. Though it was a bottom-up-led approach. Provide them a few more ideas and things which they could say, well, I like that one, or I like that one. We did a bit of that. I think the benefit of retrospect, we should have done more.
And there was in the early stages in particular, there was a nervousness, if I'm being honest, amongst officials to not be seen to be coming in with our own ideas or trying to push a particular set of processes, departmental processes. And I think that is a learning point for me, that definitely you can have a bottom-up process, and that's a really good thing, but there's a balance there. And actually what we found when we did start engaging with people and we brought the lead partners in, lead partners were actually delighted to engage with us. In fact, some of them were relieved to have that level of support. So again, you know, there's a lot of things we would definitely do differently in this, and that is one of them. Much more two-way communication and closer working.
When it's done and dusted, Dennis, and leaving aside the merits and the value of each individual project that's going to be funded, if you take this through a helicopter view, the map of Northern Ireland, will there be hot spots? Will there be cold spots where this programme has reached and not reached?
I do think there will be there's a tremendous amount of value in this. One of the things that we're doing at the moment is our statisticians are working through an evaluation process, which is much more than a sort of an academic type exercise. It's really about understanding what sort of impacts, measurable impacts, will we expect to see out of all of this. And I think when you take a look at some of the things like literacy and numeracy, I mean, we'll be coming on to that in delivering social change later on. These all seem like quite small projects in the grand scheme of things, but they can have a tremendous impact. There's no doubt about it. So, you know, notwithstanding the fact that this has definitely been slower than any of us would have wanted and has not necessarily worked the way we would have hoped or envisaged, I think that there is one of the key pieces of this is that now it is being implemented in a much more joined up way, and I think we'll get better outcomes as a result of that. I really do. But
if we move on then to 33, which is childcare, I'm just getting to look at the latest papers received this morning, Dennis. It's page 35 of table members. Commitment 33 is to publish and implement a childcare strategy with key actions to provide integrated and affordable childcare. To publish and implement a childcare strategy within this programme for government, which finishes on Tuesday.
Yeah.
And the declaration by the senior responsible officer says, I can confirm that while there have been slippages, blah, 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 this commitment is achievable.
Yeah.
You can publish and implement a childcare strategy before Tuesday.
Well, clearly, these documents were produced for an earlier quarter. But what I would say, or an earlier period to this, I mean, these were up to date as of the 31st of December.
Right. So to be cut to the case, you've provided us papers at 10:19 this morning that say that you can publish and implement a childcare strategy by Tuesday.
Well,
you're now telling the committee that's
I'm saying
not true.
I'm saying these papers. What I'm saying is these papers are at a point in time. The current position in terms of the childcare strategy is we did publish a childcare framework document,
yes,
which was the basis of a series of actions that we have taken forward, including the Bright Start grant programme. We have produced, in consultation and engagement and co-design with stakeholders, a childcare strategy, a draft childcare strategy. That is under consideration in the department as we speak.
That is a draft strategy.
That's
that
correct.
is not a strategy. Yes. So you will not be able to publish a strategy.
No, we will not meet the original objective.
Implement.
Will not meet the original objective as worded. But we will, so again, I'm not trying to say otherwise, but we have produced a strategic framework document that set out what needed to be done as a first step. Ministers were very keen that instead of producing a strategy and just having it on the shelf, that we produce this framework document, that we get work underway. That work has happened. There's a lot of different actions have been taken forward under it, and we have now developed a draft childcare strategy. That's the current position. But no, we have not met the original commitment.
The other thing, as far as I can see, that is missing, which was in previous versions of these updates, Dennis, was the risk management register. There isn't one for Commitment 33.
Yeah, and
is that because it's a failure and you don't want us to recognise it?
No, I mean the risk register doesn't change the level to which we've met the commitment or not. I mean,
so why is there no risk register for PFG 33?
Well, again, that was the decision. The decision was by the department that we would remove those risks.
Sorry, you remove those risk register papers. Obviously, the risks.
Sorry, the risks don't. Well, I mean, there's three risks. There were three risks. So, no proving of access to affordable, accessible, and good quality childcare. So, the Bright Start scheme is now up and running. The potential for the process to be lengthened, well, that's not a risk. That's an actual issue. It's happened. The potential for underspend of the Childcare Strategy Development Fund, well, ministers have made a commitment that the full £12 million will be made available and will be spent, and 4.7 million of that has been committed as we speak.
Let me not assume. Let me ask. Have you got that risk register page in your pack?
No, I have it in the original,
that's
but it's actually
previous quarter.
For the previous quarter, but it has been deleted.
Has it been updated? Did you say?
No, in the current version that you have, it's been deleted. Yes, or the version you have, it's been.
Why would you delete a risk register?
Honestly, I can't say. It's not. My view would be that. It's good to look at the risks. I think some of these risks are either past the post or they are no longer relevant. But I think it's useful to look at the risks, and we will continue to look at the risks as we move forward with the programme.
So you would agree with me maybe that a risk register is good practice?
Well, that's why we've included risk registers up to now, and I think maybe we need to update this risk register. I think that's something, and maybe there are new risks now, because even just to build on the point that you'd made at the start about how things have moved on since the original statement of this commitment, I would agree with that. So I think that's the key thing.
Okay, thank you. Bronwyn McGann.
Regarding the childcare, I some engagement with officials from Guard and some confusion regarding who's funding rural childcare, and I'm concerned about that. And you may not be able to answer that now, but if you could come back and clarify just exactly how much DART is going to be getting from this childcare strategy from OFMDFM, because I'm picking up a blockage and some confusion between OFMDFM officials and DART officials. So I would just like to raise that with you, Dennis, and if you could come back to me on that, I would appreciate it.
We'll be happy to look at that. The only thing I will say, just to give you a bit of reassurance now, is that we have a programme board with DART officials on it. DART officials were specifically tasked with going and producing a report to say what proposals that they would put. And I think that did come to the last programme board. It did come to the last programme board. So those proposals need to be considered by ministers, and then the level of funding needs to be set on the back of those proposals.
Is around the funding.
Well,
I know there's issues around the proposals, and that's fair enough, but where does the funding come from? Because they don't appear to be clear who's going to be funding rural childcare.
And I think that's a fair point. I think ministers will need to consider, first of all, they need to consider the proposals and need to consider whether they're happy with the proposals. And then after that, there will need to be, or alongside that, there will need to be a discussion about funding. There's no, so that's where we are at the minute. But I mean, I suppose what I'm saying is, I don't think there's any problem with the fact that if there are appropriate proposals that come forward, and they would fit within.
I'm not aware of that. As I said, we had the project board with DART. Phase 1 has gone out, Phase 2 and Phase 3. There was a rural focus on it. There were suggestions around trying to support the creation of rural childcare networks, with childminders working back to maybe a fixed facility in a small town or village, and certainly we're continuing to address that. So we'll
talk to DART.
We'll talk to DART.
This has not been raised. Has it been raised?
No, it hasn't been raised with us at all.
So
I had raised it, right, because I wanted to see where the rural childcare is at.
Yes.
And the comment was made to me, there's some confusion around who's funding rural childcare.
Yeah.
So
I'm very surprised. I'm surprised at that, but we'll iron that out. There's obviously an issue there in terms of communication, so we'll bottom that out.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Chris?
Thanks, Chair. Okay, so not only did we receive the papers late, but papers have actually deleted reference to information that removes evidence of a lack of progress and the impact of a lack of progress on the key issues such as childcare.
In fairness, I couldn't say that's accurate, that portrayal, because the risks are not to do with the progress is in the milestones, and the progress is in the original commitment. So that's still there.
Potential impact of a lack of progress.
Well, okay. Well, that's maybe a fair point. Sorry, I maybe misunderstood.
Okay. The chair has exhausted the question as to why they've been removed and didn't get an answer, so I'll not rerun it. But the targets in relation to childcare were, by this point, they have expended £12 million on childcare and to have achieved key milestones on a childcare strategy. We know we don't have a childcare strategy, but can you just confirm how much of that £12 million has been expended at this point?
So £4.7 million has been committed. I don't know the exact amount of expenditure, but I would imagine most of that. Henry? In terms of the obviously against that, there's been a lot of different initiatives, but the main one that we're funding through OFMDFM is the Bright Start initiative, and that is currently out. That's currently being procured.
Phase 1 has been awarded. Phase 2, they've been evaluated but not yet awarded. And Phase 3, development Phase 3, is about trying to encourage new providers to enter into the market.
Surely today was your opportunity to report in some level of detail that work that has actually been done then. But there's nothing really to go on in that respect.
Yeah. Well, I think that's certainly something we can have a look at and give more detail and give you an opportunity to have more.
Okay, thanks, Chair.
Okay, we move on to 34/37, ESC. Last week, Dennis, there was some concern expressed that the racial equality strategy was going to be subsumed into DSC. Can you tell us what the plan is?
No, I mean, the racial equality strategy and the work on racial equality stands alone in its own right. And in fact, there's a lot of work goes on within delivering social change, stands alone in its own right. Delivering social change was meant to be about, not so much about what we do, but really about how we do it. And I know that the concern, if I understand correctly where that's coming from, some of the concern was around some of the governance structures, because we had proposed that some of the work would be reported through the Delivering Social Change Programme Board, which is chaired by junior ministers and which has deputy secretaries from across departments. And the only reason for that was that in the past we've had various different groups that have been set up on an ad hoc basis with champions on them. And what happens is you get very senior people coming along to the first meeting, and then 6 months later it just tails off. So what we've had with Delivering Social Change, what we did was we set up a standing group to say this group of senior officials from across all departments will meet, will discuss social policy issues on a regular basis.
Deputies are not allowed.
And deputies, and frankly, deputies are not allowed. So we don't even, if people don't turn up, then their nameplate is sitting empty in front of the minister. And actually, it's been a really, really good way of doing business, because people do turn up, but also they turn up to it as well because they know that we mean business, that it's an important enough meeting to go to. So that was the idea. But I think then the concern was, well, that's fine, but if you're doing it all through the programme board, how does that leave the racial equality panel or these other structures, specific structures? And what I would like to reassure the committee and to stakeholders is we're not at all proposing to do away with those other structures and replace them with the DSC. It was simply to say, look, when this is the strategy identifies that key departments need to do certain things, then in order to get those departments to respond to that at an appropriate level, we will do that through this DSC programme board. And that's really it. So I don't know if that's any reassurance, but that's
very clear, Dennis, and I have to say, speaking personally, I think that principle of the cross-cutting, getting the right people at the right time in the right place is probably the biggest challenge.
Yeah.
And you're indicating that you've done it. The Minority Ethnic Development Fund, again, would just seek assurance from you, because people are concerned that as this financial year runs out, that there may be some sort of hiatus. Will groups who are currently funded continue to get funding while you work through the 15-16 solid state?
Yes, that is the intention. Yeah.
Okay. Members?
I mean, can I just say, just to say on this one, it's nice to have a sort of a good news sort of story to talk about. But I mean, there has been the signature programmes have made a lot of progress, and obviously they have their challenges, and there's a particular challenge around money and how they're going to be prioritised into the future. But if you take a look at what's happened so far, there are definitely signs that this work has made a difference. For example, while I wouldn't want the signature programme to take full credit for this, if you take a look at the 13-14 education statistics, the percentage of non-grammar school pupils in year 12 who are gaining 5+ GCSEs, including maths and English, has gone up in quite a spike. Now, whether that continues, we'll have to see. But typically it's been going up for about 1.5% per annum, and last year in 13-14 it went up by 6.5%. So I think that's an important development. So I know the committee's looked at this before, and I think it might be worth having another look again, and maybe more detail than this session allows. But just to say that that is one example. The nurture units are also showing differences in terms of the Boxall scores, which is a way of showing how the children. Using nurture units in schools, how behaviour of children's changed and how their socialisation skills are developing. There's also some developments. Do you want to talk about some of the others, Henry?
Yeah, I think that there's been, we had actually a Delivering Social Change programme board this morning, and it was the first time we brought together report cards, because what we've tried to do is to evaluate these programmes in a very different way, as opposed to waiting to the end and then evaluate them. What we're trying to do is to capture information as we go through. So we're trying to capture how much of it we're doing, how many kids do we see, how many teachers are in place. The second thing we're trying to do is what was the result, and as Dennis points out, one of the very significant results we think was in relation to that spike in the increase of the free school meals kids who were getting 5 or more GCSEs, including Maths and English at A to C. The other one that we're looking at is really in terms of the quality of the intervention, and the final one we're looking at is the unit effectiveness. How much does it cost, and what percentage of the people that participated in the programme actually saw an improvement? So it might be worth coming back to the committee and talking perhaps with our statisticians about that process, because we've used it we've piloted it on the Delivering Social Change signature programmes. We're rolling it out on all of the SIF programmes. We're pushing it in relation to the work around child poverty. It's what we're doing, and we can see some useful benefits from it. And our statisticians were successful in a joint bid with Belfast City Council to do some further work on looking at metrics which will cut across a range of these programmes to allow us to evaluate one against another. That would be a very exciting bit of work.
I mean, I don't want to keep the committee, but I mean, one of the others would be around, for example, the Community Family Support Programme, which Dell has taken forward on behalf of the Delivering Social Change, and they put about 1,800 family members through it. There's 319 NEETs, young people who are in the NEET category, so who are participating on the programme, and 65% of those progress to positive destinations. So there's definitely signs that some of these really deep, intractable problems that maybe we thought couldn't be dealt with. I mean, while this is significant money, it's not necessarily, in the grand scheme of things, when you compare it to the overall block, it's not huge from that point of view. But there is definitely signs that some of these things can make a difference. So I think it's just worth saying.
There's a central commitment of £26 million over the period, but the likes of Dell did actually put in some of their own money to co-fund the programme.
And it's a good example of cross-departmental cooperation and collaboration. So
I welcome you spending a bit of time on it, Dennis, because scrutiny too often can be on the negative side of things. It is important to highlight positives. In terms of budgets, then, if DSC is not about how you do things, but what you do, but the way you do it, is DSC broadly protected from budgetary constraints because it is only about the way you do it? The impact will be on what you do.
Well, it isn't, in the sense that, if you remember, this was funded, £26 million of projects were funded from central funds, and partly we were able to do that from some of the delays in funding Social Investment Fund, for example, that we referred to earlier. And the idea there was to try to achieve some of the same outcomes at an early stage, earlier than we could get the projects through. So that, obviously that funding is coming to an end. Now, having said that, ministers individually and collectively are looking very carefully at this and trying to find ways to continue the good work. So I think it's protected in the sense that because it's working well, ministers want to find a way of doing it, but there's not a sort of a central earmarked budget for it.
Not at this stage.
I mean, having said that, there are signs. For example, one of the projects has been successful in the Change Fund.
The nurture units have been successful in the Change Fund, so we're now absolutely assured that all of the nurture units will run until the end of 15-16. Dell are pretty confident that the family support programme will be successful in their ESF programme, and they're looking creatively to how they'll find the match for that. There are others where there are more challenges, and people will be aware of the challenges, education and the pressures on their budget. So, but the other thing that flowing on from those programmes, we've also launched this initiative with Atlantic Philanthropies, which has taken some of the early intervention work, which we sponsor on this, and taken it forward and rolling it out at a bigger scale, and also some shared education work as well.
Norman, do you want to speak to this?
Yeah, just regarding the NEETs, just to make a quick comment on that, Dennis, we had a Dale committee meeting this morning, and the NEETs category has risen from last year. But I think there's another issue where you do have highly skilled individuals increasingly filling jobs that require low skills through no qualifications. and people within the needs category cannot get a foot into the labour market. So that's obviously an issue for DL to look at. You know, we probably do need strategies, to even regional strategies, for example, even west of the band, to drill down on that,
Yes.
to try and fix the problem. So, and I hear what you're saying, because I do represent a neighbourhood renewal area in Dungannon, and there's Kyle. So, you know, you are doing good work, but there's a bigger problem here.
No, I totally accept that, and I mean, I'm talking about 319 young people there in that particular example, but I mean, that's there's still young people flowing in to that situation as well, so it's about trying to stop people becoming NEETs, or
Yeah.
I don't even like the term, and it's sometimes
I know.
young people don't like the term because they feel it's
And there's-
judgmental.
And there's some highly skilled young people who are in the needs category.
Yeah, I mean, I think the other thing is worth saying is that it's probably worth saying that a lot of these initiatives should knit together, because one of the initiatives which Dell are working really doing some great work on is United Youth, and I know we'll come back to that when we're talking about the Together Building United community work. But that really does present a real opportunity to do things differently, because it's about. One of the things that we found when we engage with a lot of young people in the Development Act programme and a lot of stakeholders. And one of the things that came out of that was that a lot of the programmes that are there at the minute are fine if you're at a certain level, if you've got a certain level of skills, or if you're healthy, you know. But if you've got particular psychological problems, or you've been excluded, or you've had drink or alcohol or drugs problems, all of those things really, there's no point in putting somebody into a training programme and hoping they can survive. So it's almost starting from where the young person is, and that's one of the things I think that is very exciting about United Youth, and I think, again, Dell are to be very much commended, and they've worked very closely with us on that. Sorry, anyway.
No, it's fine, and I agree. I think NEETs has become pejorative, and it would be good if somebody could
find a better. It used to be. I think in the beginning it started off as status zero. People were talking about, which was even worse. It was a terrible
status zero.
Status zero. In the very early days when this was because people hadn't even had any term for it because they were being ignored in a sense. And the first research I think was about trying to, once people realised, look, there's an issue here. Are young people who aren't necessarily appearing on the unemployment register, but who are in effect being marginalised. So sorry, Anna.
Chair, can I just ask briefly, the numeracy and literacy signature program that seems to have had a positive impact, is there ongoing budget to sustain that programme, or will that come to an end?
Not a central budget at this point in time, and the Education Minister I know is looking at this, and ministers are looking at this generally.
We have a commitment to provide funding, I think, up until the end of the school year in relation to that programme, so that would be the end of June. And we'll need to discuss with the Education Minister what he'll be able to do going forward. The positives are that there's a significant number of young teachers who've now been given 2 years' experience. The other positive is there's a lot of established teachers that were given a refresher in house training, particularly around literacy and numeracy. So even if the programme comes to an end, some of those skills will still be retained in the system.
There's work to be done to try and find a long-term budget for this.
There is, but I think, I mean, again, I suppose there is an issue here in the sense of people could say, well, great, we can prioritise that, but we're going to have to take the resources from elsewhere, and what do we not do? But what I would say is, when you look at the amount of funding in the grand scheme of things, and the fact that now again, we need to see whether this trend that we saw last year, or this number that we saw last year, continues. But if that continues, that's potentially closing the education gap. I mean, if we could close the education gap here, that would make a huge difference. I mean, even for the, if I mean, it's not hard, it's impossible to say exactly how many young people benefited in the sense of, because the evaluation needs to do that. But if we're talking about even 600 young people who wouldn't have got 5+ GCSEs, who are now in a position to apply for work, and a whole load of other, that's
transformation.
You can't put a price on that, to be honest.
Yep. I think the programme is costing something over $6 million a year to run. I think we gave Department of Education something like $13 million over the period, and the Department of Education put some of their own money in on top of that.
As we move to age discrimination legislation and Commitment 38, Dennis, I'm going to resist the huge temptation to say, why were young people excluded, and ask you, what can you tell us about why young people were excluded?
Well, the decision that has been reached by ministers is that the new legislation will apply to young people aged 16 over. That is broader than similar legislation which exists in the rest of Ireland and Britain. And I suppose the view was that that was the best way to try to take this forward, given that, and ministers were very open about it, even to this committee, were very open about it before, about the fact that there were differences of opinion and approach about how this should be taken forward. So I think the view by ministers was that this was the best way to try to deliver the legislation within its term.
Well, that's the next question. Is it doable within this term?
Yes, potentially, if it's done by accelerated passage. But that isn't it, because clearly there's a consultation process that needs to be gone through, and then depending on the outcome of that consultation process, a decision would need to be taken about whether that could be done through accelerated passage. It's not possible to do that through the normal.
So it can only happen this term through accelerated passage. Nobody is giving a commitment to that because we have to have the consultation.
Yeah. Well,
but both sides of the department, OFMDFM, are open to looking at accelerated passage. They're
open, yeah, they're absolutely open to looking at how we can deliver that within this term. But it may be, and while everybody, or a lot of stakeholders will want to see this legislation going through, it will come down to by stakeholders and by ministers ultimately as to the best balance, because this is, on the one hand, it's good to put the legislation through quickly, and it's good that there's been a lot of thought given to this by various stakeholders, so it may be scope to do that. The other side of that is that it may be that whenever the consultation has been done and the proposals have been looked at in light of that, that people say, well, actually this is not a good way to do.
So what's the timeline for consultation?
Consultation document to be produced basically in the next month. That's it, to go out for consultation.
April. So you'll be consulting into the summer?
Yeah, well, into the beginning of the summer, yeah.
Okay. Members, anything on that before we move on? I think this is the final one in this session, Dennis, which is Together Building a United Community.
Yep. So again,
sorry, Chair, can I ask very briefly on the age discrimination legislation? Was there any work done at any point to identify the type of issues that would arise for people under 16, and any work done to identify exemptions that could have allowed legislation to progress for under 16s, or did political disagreement mean that we never even got to that point?
There was some work done internally, as far as possible, looking at existing work elsewhere and also talking to departments. But because there wasn't an agreed approach, it wasn't possible to go out and do the sort of stakeholder consultation engagement that we would want to do.
Okay, but it's not, sorry, Chair, if I'm repeating, but the department isn't ruling out extending the legislation to under 16s at some point in the future?
I don't.
We're not at that point.
There's been no ministerial decision to say that this is it and we'll not be looking at this issue again. Certainly not.
Thanks, Chair.
Okay. On 67 then, which is Together Building a United Community, although the papers you give us, the commitment is still to publish the cohesion, sharing and integration strategy. And my goodness, it has a risk register. 353535. Dennis, we were in correspondence today, some information about the summer camps and pilot schemes, and we had pilots in 2014, we're having pilots 2015. At what point do the summer schemes stop being pilots?
I think it's a fair question. It's probably as much as anything as terminology. I mean, the intention is still to run 100 summer camps. And I suppose, in fairness, one of the things about this is we're trying to do this in a learning as we're going through the process. So the idea is to try to apply it. But actually, we're aiming to do 100 summer camps over this summer. So that would be compliant. That would comply with our commitment. I think it's more terminology than anything, to be honest.
At one of our stakeholder events for our inquiry into TBUC, which we do hope will be helpful, I found myself at a table sitting beside somebody from the kind of youth sector. And she did express a disappointment in that she said, these summer camps, that is what we do. And when TBUC was published in, May 13, she basically thought, well, my phone's going to light up in a week or two, and it's going to be yourselves saying, come and talk to us about summer camps. And I think she waited 18 months for the call. Do you feel when you say you're still learning and developing that there's a little touch of reinventing the wheel here?
Well, the 100 camps are going to go ahead. It's difficult to say without, would probably be worth just maybe hearing a bit more or getting a bit more information about the specific experience that the stakeholders expressed to you, maybe so that we can understand a bit better whether. But the bottom line is we're going ahead with the 100 summer camps, so that's what we committed to do, and we have funded a whole a raft of activity last year as well, and we've evaluated that to learn from it. So there is, to some extent, you're right. I suppose there's in the sense that you can always be innovative. There's always new innovations you can use with these things. But a summer camp is a summer camp to some extent. So I would accept the point.
Okay, Chris, and then Bronwyn.
Chair, if I can just build on what you said, Dennis. You said a summer camp is a summer camp. Well, what is a summer camp? What are these summer camps going to look like? That's going to contribute towards improved good relations in our community.
Well, there are a range of different activities that the summer camps will have. I suppose they range from sporting, arts, and other, art, sport, adventure, drama, education, and music. All of them will have a significant good relations element. The idea is for young people to young people that they maybe wouldn't come into contact with, and the idea is just really to take young people out of their current environment and give them other alternatives to explore different areas of interest.
And what's the budget for those 100 summer camps?
Sorry, I'll get the budget for. Just see, just 1 second. I think I've got it here somewhere. Sorry, I'll just be 1 second. Just trying to find that. Actually, I haven't got our budget broken down. The full budget, including all of our activities, is here. Oh no, sorry, 1.2 million.
1.2 million.
Yeah, 1.2 million.
And who will be delivering those summer camps?
There'll be a range of providers that will be delivering that. I need to check on how the grants will be issued. I don't have the detail on that in front of me. Sorry.
It's not quite late in the day to not know how organisations will be invited to apply to deliver the camps.
People do know. I'm afraid I don't. Sorry, I just need to follow up on that. Apologies.
Okay, one last question, Chair. It's a bit disappointing that the progress report in relation to this doesn't go into any detail whatsoever. There's obviously a number of key actions and targets in relation to building a united community. I would like to have thought that was probably one of the most important strategies for the First and Deputy First Minister that they'd wanted to update us on. One particular target is to roll out buddy schemes in nurseries and primary schools across Northern Ireland. Is there any, we're obviously now 2 years on from the first identification of that key target. Is there any update in relation to that particular target?
I'd have to get you an update on that. Department of Education is still considering it. If it's helpful, I can give you a broader update, even just verbally, on the range of the activities going on across the programme, but I don't have that specific thing. We can follow up on that if that's...
Maybe you could provide a more detailed written update in relation to it. I don't want to take up too much of the committee's time, and other members have questions as well.
Happy to do that.
Okay, Bronwyn.
Chair, just on the back of Chris's point, provide a geographical breakdown of where our summer camps are happening.
Yeah. Not a problem with that. I might I won't give you a detailed brief, but just to mention, I mean, obviously we've talked about United Youth. There's work going on urban villages around identifying, how those projects are going to be taken forward. We've had a number of engagement sessions on that, and we've had additional announcement of additional urban villages. There's work on shared neighbourhoods, which is going ahead, and we've had some schemes completed and opened, and other schemes going forward. And obviously there are interfaces coming down as well. So we're getting really good engagement with other departments on a range of activities, just to reassure the committee on that. But we're happy to provide more information on that, even in written form. That's helpful.
Okay. Just as I mentioned, the risk register, and this is a session being formally recorded. Let me just go back to that, Dennis. There are 3 risks identified with regard to finalising the detail, implementing and being effective in implementation. In this document we received this morning, the probability of any of those risks occurring was 3, which is on a scale of 1 to 5. The impact on every one was 5. So very high detrimental impact should they come to pass. Do you think that's out of date, or is it accurate?
Well, there's no doubt about it. I mean, just building on the points that members have made earlier, this is, we couldn't argue with the impact point. I mean, there is a huge impact if we experience significant delays on this. I think in terms of the probability, there's probably, it's probably more than, it's probably a higher probability, or indeed in some cases there have been delays. So there's no doubt about that. Well, I think where we are now, we're in a better position because all of the projects have plans, and and this funding has been issued to departments, and things are moving on. So I think we're in a good position from that point of view. There is always scope for more delays, potentially down the line.
Okay, and high risk is not necessarily a bad thing.
No.
Trying to effect a significant change. Final question, as we may, the Equality and Good Relations Commission requires legislation. I think last time we spoke, if I recall correctly, it was doable within this mandate, but the road was running out. It was tight for the timeline. Are we still in that position?
Absolutely, yeah, absolutely.
Still doable?
Well, it would be, again, it would probably be a similar scenario to the Age Goods Facilities and Services.
So
if that was agreed now, it would be probably accelerated passage would be the only way we could do that.
Okay. Probably. Is it possible that it can be done without accelerated passage? Unlikely. Just characterise.
I would just like to double check that. But my view, sitting here today, my honest view is it's not doable without accelerated passage.
Okay. Well,
we maybe just need to double check that and get back to you on that, Chair.
Appreciate that. Members, if we're content, we will say to Henry and Grania and to Dennis.
Can I just ask one question, just to get maybe in writing confirmation of the actual spend in relation to childcare provision? I know you said that you think 4.7 million has been committed, but if you could maybe write to the committee with the definitive figure of what has been actually expended. Yeah. Thanks.
Yeah, that's fine.
Thank you all very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. So, members, our second briefing covers 4 commitments. Number 15 is Maze Long Kesh. 16 is the One Plan for Derry-Londonderry. 26 is a drawdown in competitive European Union funding. And the final one is commitment number 77, changes to government structures in the post-2015 period. A clerk's brief is available in your packet, page 142. Of course, you have your blue folders as well, which have been updated from the papers from the November briefing. And the papers that were received at 10:19 this morning begin at page 60 in your tabled pack. And we welcome 4 officials for this session: Tony Kavanagh, Siobhan Broderick, Paul Geddes, and Mark Brown. You are all very welcome. Mark, do you want to say a few words to kick off?
Yes, Chair. Would you like me to cover all of the commitments at this point and take it all as one group, or do you want to split it into 2? Because I can do it either way.
All right.
It's really up to you, Mark. I'm happy if you plan to cover all 4.
I've opened comments on all 4. Okay. First of all, Chair, thank you very much for the invitation to attend. In relation to MLK, which is Commitment 15, there's currently, as the committee will be aware, no agreement on Maze Long Cash, and so the targets up to the end of the PFG period are red, as they were in previous quarters. And ministers continue to discuss a way forward with the regeneration of the site. The Maze Long Cash Development Corporation continues to meet its responsibility with regard to maintenance, health and safety, and commitment to the RUAS remains. There's no development activity on the site. In relation to the One Plan, the achievement of this commitment is on track, although there's been a delay on the delivery of some of the milestones, and the Department has put in place mitigating measures. The development of Ebrington continues with capital spend by ILEX of just under 6.5 million in 13-14 and a budget of 3.1 million in 14-15. And the Department is continuing to work with ILEX to ensure that momentum is maintained. Actually, on the site, the refurbishment of Building 70 has recently been completed, and it will open soon as a microbrewery. In addition, there's a combined cafe and bicycle workshop will open in summer 2015 on the site. I don't think those two should be combined. These ventures will be the first new businesses operating permanently on the site, and they'll hopefully pave the way for further enterprise. DOE has leased Building 71 and has set up a regional office with the Minister and the Chief Planner. The Ebrington Development Framework has also been completed, and it's envisaged that in the longer term this will ultimately support an additional 1,800 jobs in the city and generate an additional gross value added of £42 million. There's been extensive consultation on the framework with local stakeholders to try and ensure it meets the needs of the surrounding community. And the framework has been submitted for planning approval in December 2014, and subject to normal planning approval processes, we anticipate approval in June of this year. ILEX is also engaging with private, public, community and the voluntary sectors to acquire tenants for Ebrington, and currently there are 60 formal expressions of interest to establish potential businesses on the site. The Creative Industries Hub, which is on the site, will open shortly, and the Department is currently considering the business case for a business growth hub that would support 15 to 16 small to medium enterprises on the site. In terms of jobs, I mean, it's right that within the PFG, the job target should be challenging, and it's pleasing to be able to report that the jobs targets for 2012-13 of 1,175 jobs and 2013-14 of 1,670 jobs were exceeded. And these jobs have come through small business startups and expansions, support from Invest NI, and as a result of the City of Culture year. The jobs promotion target for 2014-15 is 1,200. This is proving challenging to meet in the current financial environment. The returns that we have so far from Invest NI, departments and Derry City Council show that 524 jobs have been promoted so far this year. So there's still some way to go with that, and there must be doubt that target will actually be met. The City of Culture has been completed. PFG 26 relates to the drawdown of competitive European funds and the target of increasing that by 20% over the 4-year period, which equates to a target of 64.4 million. I'm happy to report that we have met and exceeded this target. At the end of 2013-14, departments had already drawn down a total of 72.7 million, so exceeding the target by 8.2 million with a full year of the period still to run. So that's been very positive. In relation to Commitment 77, this was to agree any changes to the structure of government in the next mandate. As I've pointed out in previous briefing sessions, agreement wasn't reached in 2012, clearly, and the issue continue to be considered at a political level. The Stormont House Agreement has obviously moved matters forward considerably. The participants to the agreement confirmed the reduction in the number of departments from 12 to 9 in time for the 2016 Assembly election, and a reduction in the number of Assembly members for the 2021 election. The details of the reduction in the number of departments were considered further by party leaders in the Executive in January and February. On the 2nd of March, the First Minister made a detailed oral statement to the Assembly setting out the names of the departments and their responsibilities. The implementation of that departmental reorganisation will be very challenging administratively over the coming year. A wide-ranging implementation programme has been established with senior representatives of the departments affected, and there's a specific project being established for OFMDFM, and alongside that a legislation project has been operational since January. Work on a departments bill is at an advanced stage, and the First Minister's statement indicated that it should be introduced in the Assembly after the Easter recess. Following that, there will be a more detailed transfer of functions order brought forward for Assembly scrutiny. And these steps should lead to the legislative framework for a streamlined departmental system being in place for the next executive appointment process in May 2016. So happy to take questions.
Okay, Mark, yes, thank you very much. That's very useful in terms of setting the broad scene. In terms of Maze Long Cash, I'm not going to rehearse it. Everybody knows there is, at the moment, no political consensus within OFMDFM on the way forward. I suppose that leaves a focus on the RUAS, the Royal Ulster Agricultural Society, who were on site. And I see in the risk register, RUAS do not commence construction. A permanent centre in line with the time parameters of the development agreement is the first current risk, which scores a perfect 5 on probability as well as on impact. But what can you tell us about the current state, taking that these papers are not right up to date?
Well, the situation in respect of the RUAS is that they've run 2 very successful shows there at the Balmoral Park site. And on the 23rd of March 2015, ministers approved the relocation of the RUAS Pavilion building, which is currently located in the King's Hall site, to Maze Long Cash. And the Development Corporation is currently finalising a planning application for this relocation. The work is scheduled to commence in June to ensure that the pavilion is relocated by December 2015, in line with the terms of the RUAS development agreement. I know that's a very important issue for the RUAS because they consider the relocation of that pavilion will make their presence on the site more sustainable and allow it to increase the number of events it hosts on the Balmoral Park site.
What was the date? That was the ministers agreed the relocation?
That was just 23rd of March 2015.
That's 2 days ago? Monday? And has that been made public?
Well, we've just informed MLK, the Development Company Corporation, so that they can proceed with the planning application, and we'll make it public in due course.
Right, so there hasn't been a news release as such with regard to that. So that is actually a very
Hot
major...
off the press.
Yeah, that's a major development because that, as you say, Mark, that pavilion is the core unit in terms of the RUS's desire to move from Balmoral to it's Balmoral Park they're calling it?
Balmoral Park, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Appreciate that.
So there will be, I presume, a public announcement around that, but that was the decision was made and the communication has been made with RUAS and MLK. And as I say, that is again an indication of the commitment of ministers to the development of that aspect of the site in relation to the RUAS.
So that is the first, if I put it this way, positive development in terms of, positive news in terms of the development of MLK since the political disagreement.
Well, I think I would characterise it more, Chair, as being consistent with the ongoing support from ministers for the RUAS and their commitment to the site. And it was envisaged in the development agreement, so this is a development agreement carrying through. So I think it's consistent with the position that ministers have held.
Sure. Okay. Jimmy Spratt.
Hey, Chair, thank you for the presentation. Just to remain on the, I think it's very clear that the RUAS is fully committed to MLK because in the last 48 hours or so they put the King's Hall complex on the open market. In fact, it was advertised in the press, I think, yesterday or the day before. So it's good news to hear that pavilion, which is much down there. Can I ask you in relation to the MLK board, the Ulster Aviation Society, who have a very substantial exhibition down there on site? What's your understanding, Mark, of the connection, or what responsibilities do MLK board have in relation to that? Because there was a number of events last year that didn't take place, and obviously this is an organisation that is run by volunteers and on some very successful like tourist or attractions in there where a lot of people came in the past. Has there been any progress there?
Well, the Ulster Aviation Society has been on the site for some time, as you know, and has a very impressive collection of aeroplanes there. They have held their open day on the site in 2008,
It was
2013.
curtailed, but the last one...
There was an issue the last time that ministerial approval for the actual access to the site wasn't received in time, and the Aviation Society felt they had to cancel the event, and that was unfortunate. But it had been there for the previous 2008-2013, and in September 2014, ministers agreed to meet with Jeffrey Donaldson and a delegation from the UAS board to discuss the issues, and that meeting is currently being arranged.
So there's a likelihood of that being sorted out. Was it because of a late application the last time to ministers?
Well, I can't make a comment on the likelihood of a ministerial decision, on what way the ministers will decide on this, but certainly we expect an application.
No, I'm not asking you to do that, but maybe the point that I wanted to find out was what responsibility has the MLK board in relation to the building and the Ulster Aviation Society?
Well, the MLK board would have to be concerned with all the health and safety around the site, around access to the site, and those who would come onto the site. I think the arrangement with the Ulster Aviation Society is probably a licensing arrangement in terms of their. I think it's probably a licensing arrangement in terms of their position on the site. But applications for these kind of events would come through to the department for approval with a recommendation from the board.
Is that because of the parking facilities and all the rest of it?
It's all the parking facilities and the fact that when anyone comes onto the site, as soon as they come onto the site, they become the responsibility of the MLK-DC board. If anything was to happen to anyone, then they would be liable for that. So we have to make sure that there are proper arrangements, and all those arrangements have to be set out clearly and agreed with the corporation.
Has there been any churn in the board of the Development Corporation over the last 12, 18 months?
As I understand, it's still chaired by Terence Brannigan, and Mel is still the chief executive, and there are 9 board members. There usually is 10, but there's 9 at the minute. I'm not aware of any change, but we can come back and confirm that.
That's fine. What about budgetary pressures impacting on the MLK board, given they are so constrained in their activities?
Well, yes, it's not so much budgetary pressures, they have quite the opposite in the sense of the potential to release budget, and we have been in discussion with them around how to ensure that the budget they have available to them can be deployed appropriately. And in light of the reduced activity on this side, we reduced the budget by £500,000 last year, and the allocation for next year will be reduced by £600,000. That just reflects the level of activity on the site to make sure that money can be used productively elsewhere.
Okay, if we move on to 16, Mark, the one plan, you gave us some pretty positive reporting there in terms of job creation. One plan, year of culture. Just to go back for certainty, in terms of sustainability of job creation, what assurances can you give us on that front?
Well, I think the whole issue of sustainability is obviously a critical one, and it's tricky. It's tricky in terms of measuring and coming back to monitor. What we actually measure are jobs promoted, so that when someone, a business establishes on the site or an event happens on the site, which gives an indication that they're going to create a certain number of jobs, and that's approved, then those jobs become promoted. And really the question of sustainability requires the monitoring thereafter of how long those jobs have been there and coming back and checking at various intervals as to whether or not those jobs remain there, and there's quite an overhead in that. We monitor the data through a subgroup, through ILEX, which has departments involved in it and has INI involved in it. And they will be doing a long-term analysis of job creation in respect of the one plan. In the shorter term, Invest NI, whenever they make their investments, they include clauses on sustainability and an obligation to retain jobs. They monitor that regularly, and in fact, if those jobs aren't sustained, there can be clawback of funding by INI, and they constitute a fairly significant proportion of the jobs actually there. So there's an ongoing focus by INI, and we are monitoring through the job subgroup the sustainability for the other jobs.
Okay, and I hope I speak for the committee in saying we obviously would welcome the microbrewery and also the cycling initiative, but they should not be concentric circles under any circumstances.
Ever decreasing circles.
The drawdown of competitive funds obviously has gone better than anticipated. Another statutory committee was informed some time ago by a departmental official that their target for drawdown had been revised upwards to 50%. Are you aware of that?
Well, I think that was the decal committee, and I understand where that has come from. There's been no formal decision by ministers as to what any revised target should be in the 15-16 revised programme for government. We have been looking at a number of scenarios as to how we should put in a more ambitious target in light of our experience to date, and in light of the drawdown that we have had. And a target in that sort of an area has been proposed to ministers, but ministers have not yet agreed anything. So I think it wouldn't be correct to say that has been agreed. That is a target in that area is with ministers, and ministers, when they decide, will ultimately confirm. It would be in that region.
And what is the learning of it? And maybe, Paul, this one for you, if I may, Mark, in terms of, was the kind of 20% best guess, and by trying to achieve it and overachieving it, you've learned a lot about how to draw down funds in the competitive market?
Well, I think the first thing was the 20% target wasn't based on evidence, which was some three years ago. In the intervening period, then we've had the opportunity, because when the first target was established, we didn't have a baseline, so we had no recognisable baseline on what was possible. So the first stage was to establish the baseline, and then on projections from departments moving forward to anchor in the 20%. In the intervening 3 years, we've been monitoring drawdown, not only by department, but stream by department, and we've a sense of where arm's length bodies and third parties can generate drawdown. We also have the liaison officer resource in the Brussels office. So the assessment this time and the projections looking forward were made from a much more informed basis in the light of 3 years of accumulated knowledge. And it was on that basis that officials provided advice to ministers. And the advice that was provided took into account the views of departments and was agreed by officials in departments at a senior level.
As you mentioned the benchmarking word, can I ask where we are in terms of what I understood to be an aspiration to benchmark against highest performing EU regions of a comparable nature, which hasn't happened?
Maybe I'd kick off in that, and Paul can fill in the gaps that I will undoubtedly leave. I mean, the whole issue of benchmarking is very attractive, and where we can do it, we would benchmark to try and get accurate comparisons on a like-for-like basis and develop the learning from that. What we have found, not just in Europe, I have to say, but in other areas where we've tried to do this, is that getting absolutely precisely comparable data across different regions is extremely difficult. In many cases, the funding that is provided is only provided at member state level, or where the information is available at regional level is only available for particular funds. So we asked NISRA to look at this for us. They did a fairly in-depth investigation around this, and they couldn't identify a single source of funding. Sorry, I don't mean just one. I mean, they couldn't identify the definitive source for funding that would be below the member state level, because we would be operating at a regional level, and would give us the sort of comparable information that would really tell us exactly how well we're doing. And we could have continued to put lots and lots of resource in this to really little effect. So the view that we have taken in the task force steering group is really that the purpose of benchmarking is to identify, in broad terms, are we getting as much out of Europe as we can, find out who's doing well in particular areas and learn from that, and if we're doing better than some areas, to share our learning with them, and to then feed that back into our processes. So what we have agreed is that each department should look in their particular areas at the particular funding streams which they access to try and get what comparative data they have, and in some cases they may have below member state level information on that, and also to work through the Brussels office and the liaison officers and other contacts in Europe to find out, well, who are the people who are best in class in this area? Because generally that's known. And then you can go to the regions, you can get in touch with them, you can ask them, well, what is it you're doing at the moment? Learn from what they're doing and apply that back into our own circumstances. So we've taken the broader objective, if you like, Chair, of the purpose of this is for us to improve our game and so forth.
Right.
But we have stepped away from the detail, the chasing our tails to try and get very detailed comparison, because this simply isn't worth the candle and we can't get accurate data.
I get that. So what you're saying to me, if I'm hearing you right, is we now have a sort of an alert system so that if any region is doing really, really well in any particular area compared to us, a red light will light up and we'll go and find out.
Characterise it not so as an alert system, but that we're proactively encouraging departments through the liaison office to seek out those regions where we can learn from. And I mean, a key part of this has also been that we've changed the terms of reference of the Task Force Steering Group, and we have put within that a focus on learning from Europe where there's best practice and disseminating to Europe our own best practice, so that this isn't purely about the drawdown of funds, but this is also about influencing policy at an early stage. It's about learning from best practice. It's about sharing a best practice. It's about being aware of new initiatives coming down the track, being aware of the legal implications of things. So to broaden our sense of what European engagement is about, although the money is important and we want to make sure we continue to improve that, to broaden our sense of why we engage with Europe.
Now, we're a week away, Mark, from, I suppose, kicking off the Executive's EU priorities for financial year 15-16, but we haven't seen them.
Yes, this continues to be an issue that we're pushing hard to try and improve on. Last year, the date by which the priorities were agreed was unacceptable. It was simply far too late in the year, although of course departments would have been working on draft targets before that, but it is unacceptable. We have been engaging early with departments this year to try and get the priorities agreed, and we had hoped that we would have them agreed as early as possible, and hopefully early in the year. And we'll come back to the committee when we have those priorities in draft form. We have started early, we have made more progress, but we're not in a position yet where we have draft priorities that we can share with the committee.
Well, I have to say we were promised draft priorities in February.
Accept that, Chair, and we are working with departments to try and encourage the identification of targets that we can put into the executive priorities. So we are giving that a push, we are giving it a priority.
So
it is difficult.
Is there a draft at the moment?
There's an early draft, not an agreed draft. There's nothing that ministers have agreed. There's the early drafts that we're negotiating and discussing on with departments. It is difficult getting that agreement across so many departments.
Any update on President Juncker and the future of the task force?
Paul, do you want to say a wee bit about just where we are on that particular aspect?
Yes, Mark. The junior ministers had visited Brussels in early March, and one of the meetings that they had conducted was with Commissioner Corinne Crețu, who's the Commissioner for Regional Policy, and the relationship in terms of the continuation of the task force rests with her Director General. Now she has communicated with President Juncker and has indicated to him that she would like the task force to continue. She's confident that she will receive an assurance from the Commission President, and we hope that we will receive that very early summer. We're also seeking to incorporate that with an inward visit by the Commissioner for Regional Policy, so we hope over the next couple of months that we will have some good news to report on that front.
Final question on this one is with regard to the Northern Ireland European Regional Forum. Some question mark over its future funding. What assurances can you give us about how you see the forum going forward this year?
Well, it's something that we're looking at the moment, Chair. I think we do need to look at the range of fora that we have that contribute to our engagement with Europe. And part of the purpose and one of the key objectives when we revised the terms of reference for the task force was to look at how we can better align the various structures that there are to get to ensure the information flows that we need to and from Europe and the contacts with Europe are clearer, better understood and shorter, frankly. And as part of that, we want to look at just with Belfast City Council as just what the future of the forum should actually be. Some of the communication aspects of this we hope are being addressed through the improved website, the data on events, upcoming events, access to funding programmes that the Brussels office has actually put in place. And which it updates regularly, I think on a monthly basis, setting out any new announcements that there are in Europe, setting out any calls that there are around any of the funding programmes, and setting out the various contact points. So we think that improved information flow has maybe picked up on some of the issues that the forum was dealing with, but we do want to take a look at this alongside some of the other structures that there are there, in light of the fact that we all have to make best use of the funds that we have at the moment going forward.
It's not a turf war between you and the council, Belfast City Council?
No, far from it. This is about how we can make better use of resources collectively, and to make sure that we have the correct engagement with Europe.
Okay, the final one was 77, which is the post-2015 changes. As you say, maybe the deadline was missed, but the Stormont House Agreement turned out to be the game changer.
Yeah.
In terms of agreement. Is there anything you or indeed Tony wants to...
I'll let Tony update you on this.
Well, I mean, the current position is as set out by the First Minister in his statement on the 2nd of March, which sets out the agreement that's been reached by the Executive on the transfer of functions and the names of departments. The next stage will be legislative, and our hope is that we'll be able to get a bill to the Assembly after the Easter recess. At the same time, work will be going on with departments on two levels. One will be to identify very specifically the statutory functions which will need to transfer, and that will become integrated into a transfer functions order which will be drafted by the Office of the Legislative Draftsman here. And then we will also have, at a level above me actually, a cross-departmental programme board has been established under the chairmanship of Derry Baker, Permanent Secretary of DEL, which will involve, is involving, actually has started to meet, it's involving representatives from a range of project boards. Each of the departments affected is establishing a project board to oversee the transformation. My involvement will be in the legislation project board, and there will be cross-cutting project boards led by Department of Finance as well. So there's a lot of administrative activity going on between now and spring of next year.
So it's largely all technical and process now that
it's technical and legislative, two significant bits of legislation, the Department's Bill and the Transfer Functions Order.
What about OFMDFM? Are you clear in your own minds about the implications in terms of functionality, staffing, funding, resourcing?
Well, I'd make a few comments on doubtless added. I mean, the intention is that we will come to the Office of the Executive, and the purpose will be to support the Executive both through the Executive itself and its secretariat functions, but also through the Programme for Government and developing the thinking around the Programme for Government and monitoring progress. There will also be a number of functions that we will retain in terms of delivery around, for example, victims and survivors. And I think as part of the project that we have, we will be trying to make sure and seeking to ensure that the functions that we are transferring to some of the new departments are successfully transferred, the staff move appropriately, and the key thing there will be ensuring the continuity of business delivery. And in that regard, the project we have in our department will be linking closely with the project that's been set up to establish the new departments to ensure that all the issues that may arise in that transfer of staff and in the reshaping of functions are taken fully into account. I think the other aspect that comes in here, of course, is that prior to that there will be a voluntary exit scheme, and there will be staff who will be applying for that and will be successful in that, and we'll have to manage that process of those staff who will be in the voluntary exit scheme, any redeployment that's required from that, along with the transfer out and the reshaping of the functions that we still have within the department to make sure it's configured in the most effective way. So it's a very challenging piece of work with a number of moving parts. And it's something where we'll have a broader strategic approach, and we will have to then respond and react to how people take advantage of the voluntary exit scheme and the other issues that emerge over the course of the year.
As you say, there are a lot of moving parts. When you get to the solid state, Mark, do you anticipate, is it possible at this stage to anticipate whether you will have done away with the criticism that's sometimes thrown at OFM that it's bigger than the West Wing and Downing Street and all the rest?
Well, I think some of those comparisons, are comparing a department which has fairly significant delivery functions with other ones that don't. And even when the department is reconfigured, it will still be retaining some reasonably significant delivery functions. So I don't think the comparisons are opposite. But in terms of, if we're getting to the size of the department, we would anticipate that we have to work through the detail of it, but somewhere in the region of maybe around 30% of our staff will be transferring to new departments. So the department will become substantially smaller at that point. How that squares with the other comparators that you mentioned, I couldn't tell you at this point.
Okay. Members content? In that case, Mark, Tony, Siobhan and Paul, thank you. Thank you all very much indeed. Mark, I think you're staying on.
I'm still here, yes.
Final evidence session then, members, following the statement by the Finance Minister on the outcome of the draft budget for 15-16. We requested a briefing on the implications for the Department and the arm's length bodies. Clerk's brief for this one is at page 144. The Committee's response to the Committee for Finance and Personnel's call for evidence on the draft budget is at page 146. And a paper from the Department was received on Monday morning, and that's in your table pack at page 29. So Mark has kindly stayed with us, joined by Stephen Boyd and Sinead McCartan. Again, Mark, would you like to set the scene?
Thank you, Chair. The draft budget for 15-16 was agreed by the Executive on the 30th of October 2014, and it proposed a series of reductions to the 2014-15 opening baselines of all departments, excluding health and education. And for OFMDFM, the draft budget proposed a resource DEL allocation of £65.4 million. This included £5 million of historical institutional abuse funding, which is ring-fenced, and an allocation of £3 million, which the DFP Minister indicated was for victims and survivors, and thus was effectively earmarked. So the impact on the remaining areas of the Department's budget was a reduction of 8.4 million, or 12.8%. In December, Ministers approved a series of proposals necessary for OFMDFM to live within the proposed reduced budget in 15-16, and these were put out to consultation on 28th of November. During the consultation period, we received 21 responses from public, private and voluntary organisations, as well as from private individuals. Officials also met with a delegation from the Northern Ireland Council for Voluntary Action. There were a number of issues that emerged, but really the key issue that emerged from the consultation was the fact that there was no funding had been allocated in the draft budget to promote and sustain key programmes under Together Building a United Community. Final budget settlement then for 2015-16 that was agreed provides OFMDFM with a total resource budget of 67.9 million, which is an increase of 3.2% on the opening 2014-15 baseline. Again, within this, we have money for the Historical Institutional Abuse Inquiry of 5 million and for EU funds of 1 million. The settlement also includes additional resources of 1.5 million, which were earmarked for the Victims and Survivors Service. This allocation was made at final budget stage and is additional to the 3 million allocation to victims that was indicated at the draft budget stage. But outside of these earmarked and ring-fenced areas, the budget represents the same reduction of 12.8% on the opening baseline for 2014-15 for the remaining areas of the Department's activity. In common with the experience of other departments, reductions of this quantum have represented a significant challenge, and we've had to take some difficult decisions to make sure we can live within the reduced budget. And we intend to absorb these budget cuts through reductions to the three main spend areas that we have. Those are the core department, our arms length bodies, and then our programme expenditure. And the approach that we took was to, first of all, apply the necessary 12.8% cuts to the departmental pay bill, and then identify any other deliverable reductions and efficiencies within the department on top of that. Secondly, to start from a presumption for all arm's length bodies of 12.8%, and then assess the extent to which that level of reduction was achievable, and the extent to which that would protect delivery of statutory functions, and if it wasn't achievable and deliverable, to adjust accordingly. And thirdly, then to take the remaining amount required from programme, the idea behind this being to minimise the impact on programme delivery. In terms of the actions we took, I'll outline each of these in turn. In relation to the core departmental spend, around 1/3 of the total department's budget is expended on staffing and administration costs. And we're implementing the plans to deliver the 12.8% reduction in staffing budgets, and also to reduce expenditure on research and to make savings in the maintenance costs associated with the former military sites. And together these will provide budget reductions of 3.1 million in our core departmental expenditure. This is against a target of 8.7 million. For the arm's length bodies, in 14-15 there were about 56.5% of our budget was allocated to arm's length bodies. So we assessed each of the arm's length bodies. We could give them scenarios of 10% reductions and 15% reductions, and ask them to assess the implications for them and the implications for their statutory functions and so forth. And based on that information, we considered what level of savings they could deliver in 15-16. And on the basis of that, we identified specific reductions for each arm's length body, which in total has reduced arm's length body, our ALB budgets by 4.4 million, or 11.9% in 15-16. And the ALBs will seek to absorb the impact of these reductions by focusing strongly on the delivery of their statutory requirements, and also taking steps to streamline work and improve efficiency. In addition, 3 of the ALBs have identified a requirement to offer a voluntary exit scheme to their employees in order to reduce their total workforce to deliver those savings. And the third area is programme spend, almost all of which is on good relations. And the final budget settlement, I mentioned earlier on that there was criticism that there was no formal allocation for Together Building United Community. Well, the final budget settlement included a £10 million allocation for TBUC, which to be held centrally and allocated as part of the June monitoring process. And ministers have approved a drawdown of 3.3 million from that 10 million to OFMDFM for the specific initiative that the department is taking forward. This will maintain the funding by OFMDFM on good relations programmes at just over 8 million in 2015-16, and will support the rollout of key initiatives in this area. Briefly, in relation to capital, the department has been allocated a budget of 4.2 million for 15-16. This has been allocated to ILEX, 2.8 million, the Clum Road Jail, 700,000, and Maze Long Cash, 700,000. In regard to central initiatives, the final budget maintains an allocation for delivering social change initiative of £14 million resource and £15 million capital in 15-16, which is the same as the allocation for 14-15. That will support the rollout of the Social Investment Fund, the DSC signature projects, and the childcare strategy that was being discussed earlier. So looking forward, the department will enter the 2015-16 financial year with a balanced budget, but with a pressure of £600,000 that we will have to meet over the course of the year for international relations and the Beijing office that wasn't provided for in the budget settlement. This is an executive commitment, so we intend to bid for this at June monitoring, and indeed it was funded in last year. So we'd be hopeful, all other things being equal, of that bid being met. So in concluding, the 15-16 budget settlement for OFMDFM has been tough, as it has been for other departments. We've sought to absorb the necessary 12.8% reduction in budget by protecting programme delivery and frontline services as far as possible, by focusing reductions on the departmental pay bill and administration costs, and applying differential reductions to our arm's length bodies. Now, while our arm's length bodies will find the reduced budgets difficult, we're satisfied from the information they've given us that they will be able to continue to deliver their statutory functions. And while it's been necessary to also make reductions to some aspects of OFMDFM good relations budgets, the very welcome additional £10 million provided for TBUC and the OFMDFM drawdown from that will ensure the ongoing rollout of important work in this area. So happy to take questions.
Again, thank you, Mark, an awful lot. And almost random start, you mentioned the Beijing office. Can I just ask, The office of the Northern Ireland Executive in Brussels, and indeed the Northern Ireland Bureau, which is, I think, 4 staff in Washington, 1 in New York. Where do they fall? Are they in the Executive Services Directorate, or where's the budget line for these bodies?
They would be within our core departmental spend. So when we were looking at our 12.8% reduction, we looked to those offices as well to make their contribution to the reduction. They wouldn't be an arm's length body. They're part of the department.
They're within your budget, within the Resource Regeneration, International Relations and Institutional Review Directorate. So
yeah, at the very top there.
Yeah,
that
the
first
top
bit.
line.
Yeah, gotcha. Okay, they're just not specified on this
No, they're not
document.
separately identified, but they are
Okay.
within that.
The very first one, just above that, is head of the Civil Service Directorate. And given you're talking about a kind of overarching 12.8% target, the head of the Civil Service, his budget is reduced by 0.87%.
Yes, well, the 12.8% was to be applied across those areas of the department outside the ring fence areas. We didn't break it down and apply it mechanically to every single area, because our view was that we have to prioritise our activities. What we did was we asked all areas to come forward with suggested reductions. We then looked at what the impact of those reductions would be, and we took the judgment that in some cases applying such a cut evenly at every area would have a differentially bad impact. In particular around Hawk's office, it's a very, very small office. It's been under increasing pressure with all the Stormont House agreement and all the other stuff that has been going on recently. Has hugely increased the pressure in that office. So actually they've done very well to provide the support they have provided, even with the same budget, never mind a small reduction.
So to be clear, I mean, in cash terms, the budget's been cut by 4,400 at less than 1%.
Yeah.
Okay, the equality budget, I'm calculated as being down 14.52% on last year. But of course, within equality comes the Historical Institutional Abuse Inquiry, which now has a ring-fence budget. And I think, therefore, if you take equality minus the HIA, the cut year on year to the equality budget is 24.87%. Mark, it's a quarter. How did that happen?
Well, as I say, I mean, the process was to find 12.8% reductions across the whole areas, across all those areas of the department outside the ring fence. The proposals were put forward by the various directors, and we looked at those and we made the reduction necessary. In terms of the pay bill, within EQSD, it would have been subject to the same reduction as other parts of the department, so it would have been 12.8%. In respect of other areas around equality, yes, one of the key things we did above pay bill was to look at what other areas can we potentially reduce. One of the areas we looked at was research, and we took a significant amount of money out of research. We took £700,000 out of research. That's leaving a research budget of £400,000. Now, the reason we did that was because there had been a significant research programme and a lot of ad hoc projects had been put in place, and those contracts were coming to an end. So there was an opportunity to finish those projects off and not to start a substantial raft of new projects, but to still have within what was left, the 400k left, projects we need to give us the measures and the indicators we need to know whether our programmes are actually having an impact.
Is this research being commissioned through NISRA or not?
It's commissioned through a range of
I think so. Well, just for clarity, one of the issues we were having with reading down into this is that this year you've just given us a budget line on equality. Last year you broke it down across, I think, well over a dozen units: NISRA, age, race, victims, CSI, childcare. Those are missing this year. Why would that be?
Well, the reason for that, Ger, is because we would have got into a very, very confusing discussion along the lines of the sort of comparison you've just been making, because at the very start of the year there are initial allocations made to a number of these areas, and then we have to adjust them because my accountant friends can explain in detail why that is the case. But we would have ended up chasing our tails around a lot of the detail of this, when in fact there's some funding in that area but may be moved over at the first opportunity. This has got to do with the units that we actually, the business units and so forth, and the way funding has been set up unallocated. But I'll let my accountant friends, colleagues, explain the detail of it.
Let me just say, Michael, I mean, with respect, I don't think scrutiny for this committee is chasing your tail. If we are interested to know why childcare received a certain percentage different from victims and victims different from economic research, I do think that is part of the
Sorry, Chair, I must apologise. That was loose language by me. What I meant to say was that it would have been very misleading for and not informative. What would be more useful is that when we have the funding all in the appropriate areas, which takes a few months into the year, that will give a better picture of what the impact actually is.
Okay. And on the broad point again, I come back to non-ring-fenced equality is cut 24.87%, and that doesn't stack up compared to, say, Strategic Investment and Regeneration Directorate, 22.18%, Office of Legislative Counsel, 15.68%, North-South Council Directorate, 10.12%, Executive Information Service, 4.68%. This non-ring-fenced equality is massive compared to everywhere else.
Well, if I just make, I'll Stephen come with some of the details in a sec, but as I say, we didn't apply 12.8% the whole way down into every single branch, because there are some areas where we simply couldn't reduce support. Some of the critical areas of support to ministers, some of the critical areas of support to the Executive Committee, for example, it simply wouldn't be acceptable to have reductions in there in terms of the support that ministers are receiving. So in trying to apply these, we have to look at the areas where we can minimise the impact on business, and that's why we have differential reductions. I suspect if we had applied it commonly the whole way through, the other criticism would have been, well, do you not have any priorities within the department? And we had to establish what those priorities actually were. They're also within the detail of some of them. There can be some confusions because there are other factors to be brought to bear. For example, in relation to the Office of the Legislative Council, there doesn't seem to be a significant reduction there. But what we have agreed with other departments is, in fact, that because of the rising costs that there have been associated with the OLC related to the number of bills that are coming in and the difficulty in attracting people to that area, they will in fact be making a contribution to costs, and that has been an important aspect of helping us to balance our budget in that area. So in fact, they've actually been generating some income, if you like, from other departments. Is there anything else you want to say about the quality, Stephen?
Yes, I was just going to say the actual quality on the staffing budget, they lost, I think, just over 12.8%, which is quite equivalent to some of the other areas. But they also experienced a 1.2 million cut in their programme spend. But what goes on top of this is the T-Buck allocations, which isn't included in this figure, because ministers hadn't at that stage allocated funds from T-Buck. So their budget will actually increase as we get funds from the central funds for T-Buck, SIF, DSC. So that'll still have to be added in. That'll go in later in the year, probably through June monitoring and the later monitoring rounds in the year.
Yeah, I think that goes back to my point, Chair, earlier on in my opening still. I appreciate there were a lot of figures in there, but where I was making the point that the funding on the Good Relations programmes is being maintained at just over £8 million each year. That takes account both of OFMDFM's own funding and some of the T-Buck drawdown that we have, so that is being maintained.
I hope you accept that my interest is to see whether vulnerable are being impacted by the cuts, particularly in equality. And for example, the committee has for some period of time taken a particular interest in victims and survivors. And what I do see is that while there is a very significant uplift of over 13% to the Victims and Survivors Service, which I'm sure we all welcome, when we look at the Commission for Victims and Survivors, there's a cut of over 15%. Why is that?
Well, the Commission was asked for the impact, along with all the other volunteer bodies, of both 10% and 15% reductions. And in the end, where we felt that any arm's length body could accept a 12.8% reduction, which was our starting point, we applied that. And based on the information they gave us, they indicated that they could maintain their services with that 12.8% reduction, and that is what we applied. There must be some other additional reductions in there. I don't know what's associated with the fact they haven't got a commissioner at the moment, and there's any savings around that. But
That's
there
my
might be some
question
delay in
mark.
point. Well, there might be some delay in the. We want to try and programme in the point at which the appointment will be made and the necessary cost.
So can you tell me what assumption has been used in terms of when you think there will be an appointment of the next Commissioner for Victims and Survivors?
I can't. I'm afraid, Chair. I'm not sure what assumption we actually put in. I suspect we probably allowed, off the top of my head, a month or two for that appointment to be made. But it had been made by our finance side in the broadest sense. It's not predicated on a very precise date from the policy side.
Okay. Deputy Chair, Chris.
Thanks, Chair. Thank you for the presentation. I probably have a number of questions that realistically would need to have presented to ministers, to be honest, so I'll not go into those too much. But in 2007, I think it was, OFMDFM commissioned Deloitte to conduct research to estimate the cost of division in Northern Ireland. That was estimated at over £1 billion. What, if any, serious work has OFMDFM undertaken since then to update that assessment and reduce that cost?
Well, I'm aware in broad terms back then that research was carried out. I'm not aware of any specific plans that there have been to revise that. But, the programmes that the department's taken forward around TBUC, around delivering social change, they're all designed to try and reduce the potential impact of the problems we have in our society, and the funding, as I mentioned earlier on, that has been maintained this year around good relations programmes is all there to try and support programmes to try and reduce division and increase contact, appreciation of diversity, and appreciation of the role that different groups have to play in our society. And there is evaluation ongoing of those programmes.
The £10 million that has been allocated for TBUC, is there any greater detail as to how exactly that will be distributed at this point?
Well, there's some £6.7 million of that ministers have determined how that will be approved, and the rest is under consideration. Some £3.3 million of that will come to OFMDFM, which includes the £1.2 million that was referred to earlier on for the 100 shared summer schools by 2015. Up to £2 million for the Central Good Relations Fund, 100,000 for summer interventions, and that makes the 3.3 million for OFMDFM. In relation to the 10 new shared education campuses, it's £0.2 million. 10 new shared housing schemes, it's sorry, Chris, yeah. And for the 10 new shared housing schemes, 0.29 million. And for the programme of cross-community sporting events, 0.545 has been identified. In relation to developing 4 urban village schemes, 2.46 million. And that collectively comes to 6.795 the allocations ministers have currently approved, and the remainder of that, which is 3.4 million, is under consideration.
Okay. There's no real greater detail in terms of exactly what will go into the like of the urban village scheme, for example. At this stage, it's really headline allocations, yeah.
That's the headline allocation. I mean, the work there is being led by DSD and is currently being developed.
Okay, thanks, Chair. Some of those are reasonably significant investments of public money. I would have wished to have received a bit more detail in relation to that. I think, in fairness to the officials, I think that requires ministerial input as well, but appreciative of the updates to date. Thank you.
Jimmy.
Thank you, Chair. Oh, thanks, Mark, again for the presentation. You mentioned during your presentation that the was to reduce by a third. I think is what I
staffing by a
third.
Staffing and the transferring functions, which are going to the new departments, will reduce our numbers by a third. But the actual pay bill reduction this year, which is separate from that, is 12.8%.
What I'm more interested in is you mentioned that there were 3 arm's length bodies. We're considering a voluntary exit scheme.
Yeah.
Tell the committee who those 3 bodies are. Assure the committee that voluntary exit scheme will be a voluntary exit scheme no different from what is being proposed, so that some of these cats within some of these arm's length bodies don't have a separate scheme to feather their own mess out of it.
Yeah. Well, the provision that's been made for voluntary exit includes funding over a period of up to 4 years. This is under the Stormont House Agreement, and will include arm's length bodies. And the provision there is that, first of all, they must have an approved scheme. And secondly, there must be a business case approved.
Whenever we're talking about an approved scheme, we're talking about a scheme that will be better than what is in the scheme that will be agreed for everybody else.
A scheme that would be no more generous, but it could be different in detail.
There's no opportunity for any of those organisations to make their own rules.
No, they have to be no more generous than, my understanding has to be no more generous than the scheme that's been provided for the civil service. They also have to bring forward a business case, and it has to be approved through their own department, through DFP, before anyone can be released. There's no question of them being able to get a portion of money, go off and do whatever they want with it. It'll all have to be set out clearly. The reason for the number of staff going, the implication for business, the costs, the payback time, and all of that will be subject to approval.
The reason I asked the question is to make sure that the people at the bottom of the pyramid, if you like, are treated in a fair way and the same way as some of them higher up within the organisation, given that any of these folks who are in the arm's length bodies originally were people who came from the civil service, and they must all be treated equally. And here you say you think, but really safeguards needs to be put in place so that these bodies can't go up.
There are safeguards in place, and we will be evaluating. We're waiting for business cases coming in from. We've asked them by the end of this month. We have to put bids in the June monitoring round. Basically, the way we've been informed by DFP, funds will be allocated from the central pot, and they'll allocate it on a rationing basis. So the cheapest, basically, the most savings are the bodies who are generating the most savings will get the funds. There's no guarantee everyone will get funds this year due to the overall size of the pot. So they just can't get. If they were basically if they were putting schemes just for a higher rate of people, they may not get the funding for it.
It's all about value for money, and in practice, the bulk of staff, particularly in our arm's length bodies, tend to be either in civil service terms and conditions, and would be subject to exactly the same scheme, or in the nil-cost scheme, which has approved and agreed terms within it. So I don't think there's that. I don't think the risk you're referring to is going to materialise in those areas. But that process of the business case and approval will ensure that it's the best return for every pound invested. It's the best return that puts you up the priority list in terms of who actually gets it.
Like the numbers we're talking about, we think is roughly about 7.
For us, they're very tiny.
It's about 17 people for our 3 arm's length bodies. So it's small numbers.
I'm not sure. I did ask the question who the 3 arm's length bodies were. I'm not sure I heard an answer.
Yeah, it's the ECNI and Nikki, and we'll have to come back to you on the PACWAC's the other one, the Planning Appeals Commission and the Water Appeals Commission. So those 3.
Thank you.
That's an interesting point, Jimmy Race. That's the first time I've heard mentioned that there might be more than one size-fits-all voluntary exit scheme. Is this because of technical reasons like pension schemes?
Yeah, it's because any sort of voluntary exit scheme has to relate to the employer and the terms and conditions that's employed under, and the overall control then is to make sure that it's not any more generous you aren't funding it
Yes.
as
Yeah.
members said, a more generous scheme, but also that is done in a way which represents best value for money, and it's those that give the quickest payback in terms of what you're paying out are allowed to go first, and that tends to be those with less service.
Sorry, just maybe one follow-up, Chair, in terms of, you say there's three at the minute and you've told us who they are, but I assume the scheme's still open for some of these other arm's length bodies to come in. I mean, you know, if somebody else in one of the other arm's length bodies or a group of people say, well, we would like to choose this opportunity to leave, I assume they can approach that body and...
Yeah, yes, they can come to us and put a case in, because but we've already consulted with them, and that's only 3 parties that have said that.
Whenever you say, Stephen, they can come to you, I mean, they obviously can't come to you as an individual. But I just wonder, given some of the other arm's length bodies, and I know there's arm's length bodies within some of the other departments, they're not necessarily OFMDFM departments, but how, I mean, do you understand that each arm's length body has widely consulted with their members or their employees?
Well, there's a couple of things to say. First of all, the funding available for this, I said in the Stormont House Agreement, is set out over 4 years. It's 200 million, 200 million, 200 million and 100 million. The scheme for the civil service is currently for the first year, and the first year only, at this point in time. There are clear dates set by which departments have to come forward with the number they expect to go out, and likewise for the arm's length bodies. But it's likely that the arm's length bodies will be able to access this over a longer period of time. So there will be further opportunities. There's a timetable set out, you know, for each tranche, if you like. So I think there's one, and I think September, October is a critical one when the applications have to be in for next year, and when the business cases all have to be approved for. Then whenever there's the next budget settlement going forward, everyone will be looking again at their budgets and what is the requirement for reduced. Because this is a movable phase. At the minute we only know 15, 16, but when we get the next 3 or 4 years, everyone will have to look at it again and say, well, you know, can I afford the staff I've got? What access would I need? So that's why there will be schemes over a number of years.
Thanks, Chair.
Just, Mark, one other question on that. If the objective is met of 20,000 public servants leaving over the time period, it's pretty much a seismic shock. It's not something we've ever experienced in Northern Ireland before. In another place, I asked for an assurance that not a single person of that 20,000 would leave on a Friday, only figuratively speaking, to be brought back in on the Monday, because nobody knew how to do that job. And I was assured that will not happen because people will be trained up. So my question is, have you any sense of the impact on training budgets within the broad public sector that will be required to manage this transition?
That's the sort of work, Chair, that will be done by the various project boards that have been established in terms of restructuring of department, as well as the voluntary exit scheme.
Does OFMDFM have such a board?
We're establishing one. We've just put terms of reference out internally, and we expect to establish one in the next week or so. But I mean, there's going to be a number of areas, because even at this time of change, staff are going. It's particularly important that those staff who remain in the service are supported to be able to do their work. So training, actually the requirement for training is likely to increase rather than decrease. Absolutely. But it hasn't yet been quantified. I know, but that's something that all those project boards and all departments will want to look at over the next couple of years.
So it would not be unreasonable to think that there will be a requirement for additional budget and resource?
Well, there will be a requirement for additional training, and I think departments will have to be innovative around how they actually manage to provide that. Some of it could be job shadowing, it could be peer-to-peer training, which has a cost, but it's not an explicit, you know what I mean, it's staff time cost. So there will be those. I think we'll have to be innovative about how that training is actually provided.
Appreciate it. Alex Maskey.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for your presentation. So 2 questions, really. In terms of the 3 areas there, the arm's length bodies, where you're suggesting there might be jobs going. I suppose it's probably a small number, but 2 of them are children related, Nicky and Cindy, if I remember. CNI and Nicky. Just wondering, could there be any disproportionate negative impact on the children's sector as a result of any of that?
Well, what we asked all of the bodies to do, was to assess what the impact would be, and a number of these of the bodies, and my colleague may be able to give me the detail on this, but in a number of the bodies there were, for example, existing vacancies which hadn't been filled. So the action to save budget would have been around not filling the vacancy and suppressing the post. In some other circumstances, there were staff who wanted to leave and there could be access to the exit scheme. And in other cases, there were some non-statutory functions that some of the bodies would do, such as in terms of giving advice or in terms of promoting their activities or increasing awareness of the office, where the arm's length body has decided that they will cut back on that in order to preserve the staff. So it hasn't all fallen on staff. In fact, what we've asked them to do is to make sure they can get, and what we said front and central is that they must protect the delivery of their statutory function and alert us if there's any risk to that.
Now, I thought you said there were something like 17 posts going out of those 3 organisations, so that would be posts.
Yes.
Someone may be suppressed.
But in some of those bodies, I think it's fair, in one in particular, they have been downsizing over time, and in fact, even before the current voluntary exit scheme, they have been funding their own. From their reserve, they've been able to fund some voluntary redundancies in order to reduce their pay bill, because these budget pressures have been going on for some time. It's just that they've become particularly significant in the past year.
The second question would be around the good relations funding, because I think you detailed early on a figure of something like £8 million would have been available previously, and it's available now again, if I read that correctly.
Yeah.
We have a different kind of configuration, money coming out from T-Buck and so on. But under that same amount of money, you presume then there'll be less money available in cash terms. So I'm not sure whether that actually is the case. A year on, 2015, 16 £1 million, you're normally told that's going to be less valuable than it would have been last time around. So I'm wondering, are there any kind of specific losers or identified losers in that new funding arrangement? And I'm thinking particularly around the ethnic minority funding arrangements, which is kind of generally ad hoc and a bit.
No, the minority ethnic funding's been maintained. Last year's levels, I think that was about just over 1 million, plus then the crisis. There's the 100,000 set aside for the crisis fund for this year as well.
In effect, no loser on that?
No, not in the minority ethnic.
Not in the minority ethnic, and in terms of the good relations funding, I mean, one of the programmes and one of the savings that was made was a programme that was coming to an end in any case. The Contested Spaces programme, there was £500,000 in that, so that came to a natural end, and it hasn't been specifically replaced, so that was one saving there. And there had been a reduction to some of the District Council good relations funding the previous year. We've carried that through. And there have been other programmes then put in place, so as you say, it's a different configuration.
Just one final point, Chair, if you don't mind. I mean, I'm not sure if you're able to have an answer to that particular supplementary, but in terms of the Contested Spaces funding, are you aware of any evaluation which would people say maybe that programme has come to an end, but would it have been beneficial to continue? Was there an argument to make it continue, or is there any evaluation that in the absence of having that programme we'll go worse off, or we're not tackling a problem? I don't know. So.
Well, I could come back to you on the evaluation. That would be our policy colleagues would look after that, but it had a set time frame. It was planned to end, and so it ended, and that's it. Kept. But obviously the other initiatives we're taking in that whole area are all designed the same type of problem, perhaps in a slightly different way.
Yep.
We can certainly come back to you with any
appreciate that
on the evaluation.
If there was any evaluation, because as you know, a lot of organisations programmes start off, they get funding for a year or a period of time or one programme, but they're actually continue on. Thank you very much.
Alex's first question, just to follow up, you did assure us, Mark, at the beginning that all the ALBs will be able to perform their statutory duties despite the financial constrictions. Would the same apply to the VES? That business cases and so forth would take into account whether losing a post would impact?
Developing the scheme, each ALB will need to develop a business case, and that business case will need to set out how business continuity will be maintained.
Okay. You made a magnificent defence of the head of the Civil Service Directorate's 0.7% reduction, given the support he had to give in the months that led to the Stormont House Agreement and now subsequently with the implementation. However, the Office of Legislative Counsel is also going to be very busy if we implement the Stormont House agreement, and that department's losing 15.68. Is that going to impact on the OCL's ability, given, I mean, I think in the last term we went from 9 executive bills to 16 to 25 in the last year of the mandate. So there's a natural progression towards the end of the mandate to see more executive bills, and on top of that we have the pressures of implementing Stormont House.
Yeah, I mean, I think the OLC it's been a difficult area to recruit to and to retain people. Their expertise is very significant, and it's a very specialist area. So we have had a constant battle, to be frank, over the last number of years in attracting and retaining staff there, and we've had to. I know Brenda King has worked very hard to ensure that she attracts people, and some of them work remotely and so forth. But the interesting thing she's always said is that they are very keen and very interested in coming to work in Northern Ireland or work on Northern Ireland issues because they find it all very interesting and enjoyable. But they are expensive. And they are difficult to attract and retain, and we were able to attract some on a secondment basis that had to go back to the GB administration, and in addition there were a number of vacancies that they have been trying to fill for some time, which in fact, as I said, they're not really going to be able to fill. And what Brenda's looking at going forward is a mixture of trying to attract some more people in, but also trying to train up from within her own resources staff who will be able then to fill the vacancies in the team. So that doesn't reflect any diminution or in the importance of the legislative programme. It's just we're doing it differently. And the other aspect is, I mentioned earlier on that departments have agreed to contribute towards the increasing costs. So there will be some income coming in from departments that will increase that, but that wouldn't be the full quantum. I don't know, Stephen, if there's anything else.
Well, yes, we're expecting to spend about 1.7 million this year. We're expecting the other departments basically have agreed to fund OLC to the tune of 50,000 each. So we'll be actually increasing that budget by another 550,000.
Right. Well, as you may know, this committee is considering bringing forward legislation for a new Northern Ireland Public Service Ombudsman, but we weren't expecting to pay for it.
It's expensive business.
Money on you.
It's more than loose change. Thank you very much indeed, Stephen, Sinead, Mark. Thank you. Mark, by the way, would it be possible to give us the breakdown under equality that we got last year? Just out of interest, would it be possible to forward that, by gender, age, victims?
Yes, Chair. If you could give us a little time to get the allocations in the right place. There's a wee bit of adjustment needs to be taken because some of these units of business have been set up in a particular way which doesn't accord anymore with the way the money's actually used. So it takes a wee bit of while to get in there, but certainly we'll come back.
Appreciate it. Okay. Okay, members, we've already looked at the forward work programme, so it is only to ask, is there any other business? And if not, may I wish you all a happy Easter, and we are adjourned until Wednesday the 15th of April at 2 p.m. here in room 30.